The town of Christian Springs was big enough to justify having its own cold storage, but far too small to make proper use of it. On average, I would end up seeing about 5 bodies a month, most of them overdosed from the smaller towns nearby. The town of Christian Springs was big enough to justify having its own cold storage, but far too small to make proper use of it. On average, I would end up seeing about 5 bodies a month, most of them overdoses from the smaller towns nearby. My work at the morgue was quick and impersonal. No one that I could recognize ever ended up on my table, and the toxicology reports always came back with a clear-cut case of death, usually something in the realm of opioids. What I saw in that fluorescent-lit room always stayed where it belonged. My work life and my family life were always two separate entities. That all changed during the Christmas season of 2003. 2 local bodies were brought in within 24 hours of each other. Neither of them were like anything I had ever seen. The first body once belonged to Chelsea Steeler, a local first grader. After school let out for winter break, Steeler walked off the premises only to return a couple minutes later, bleeding from her mouth. Steeler stumbled through the school's playground, begging for help, and then collapsed. She was pronounced dead soon as emergency services arrived. The second body I recognized, Christine Morgan. Morgan was someone that most people in Christian Spring community would recognize. She was the crazy religious lady. As the name of the town might imply, we have our own fair share of Bible thumpers in town, but Morgan's breed of spirituality was considerably more aggressive than anything you could find being peddled by the televangelists that the locals watched. Both the cinemas in Christian Springs banned the woman from their premises on account of her interrupting screenings of even the most milquetoast of movies with her raving sermons. When the local museum set up a dinosaur exhibit, Morgan was banned from there too. To her, dinosaur bones were the work of Satan, created to lead the true believers astray. It was Christine Morgan's daughter, 7-year-old Grace Morgan, who discovered the body. When I first heard this bit of information, I found myself pitying the child. My ruminations about Grace Morgan's well-being were soon whisked away by what I discovered during the autopsies. Both of the bodies exhibited internal damage, the likes of which I had never seen or read about before. Their stomach lining was shredded to bits. Chunks of their liver were found inside of their esophagus. Every internal organ that was still intact showed signs of extreme scarring. It was as if something had torn them up from the inside. The cause of death was a complete mystery. Aside from a shared geographical location, the 2 women had nothing in common, yet the severity of their injuries was almost identical. It was as if someone had planted bombs inside of them and set tiny bits of shrapnel flying through their organs, yet there was no shrapnel to be found. There were no clear trace of instrument that had killed these women. On closer observation, however, I found something else that connected the 2 bodies. In the confounding mess of viscera, I found something that made their cause of death seem quaint by comparison. Even though they were bloodied and covered in loose chunks of flesh and membrane, I immediately knew what I held in my hands. I was holding 2 tiny gingerbread men. They were small, both fitting into the palm of my glove, but they still inspired fear. Unlike the big-eyed, smiling gingerbread men that we sold at the local bakeries, the creations I held in my hand had tiny slits for eyes, and their mouths were stretched into long, harrowed screams that descended well into their torsos. The baked goods I held in my hand were the product of a disturbed mind. I called just about everyone I went to school with. From the few colleagues that picked up, I couldn't find anyone who was willing to drive over and take a look at my findings. Everyone was either far too busy dealing with their personal aspects of the holiday season, or were swamped with the suicide spike that Christmas brings. Even past their business, no one believed me. When I described the 2 foreign objects I found lodged in the bodies, a couple of my old classmates even inquired whether I was sober. Not being able to find any explanation through my informal channels, I called my boss on the county level. His annoyance with my phone call was crystal clear. The town of Christian Springs was not on his radar, and in his opinion, mysteries that weren't directly connected to criminal investigations were better left unexplored. After a long back and forth, he agreed to drive down and investigate the gingerbread men as soon as his schedule cleared up. He suggested that I shouldn't go into detail on my report if I didn't want to undergo a psychological evaluation. I filled out my report as best I could, but the cause of death still ended up as unknown. After a couple more phone calls to the old colleagues who didn't pick up the first time around, I gave up. The mystery of the gingerbread men would have to wait until after the holidays. I placed the cookie creatures face down in a glass jar, put on my coat, and drove back home. My wife didn't like me talking about work at home. In fact, she didn't like me talking about work at all. Whenever the question of what I did for a living came up at dinner parties, she quickly said that I worked with the police, or call me a doctor, and then quickly changed the topic. When I came home that evening, I didn't mention anything about the gingerbread men, but all night long, those slitted eyes haunted me. I dreamed my son walking into our bedroom in the middle of the night, clutching his stomach. I dreamed of my wife getting up to comfort him, but kneeling over in pain as well. I dreamed of my family lying on those metal slabs, me cutting their chests open, finding nothing but pink mush where their organs should be. When I woke up that morning, I was overjoyed to find my wife sleeping next to me, unharmed by the baked monstrosities that tore through my sleep. But the joy didn't last long. My family might have been alive, but those two gingerbread men were still real. They were still waiting for me in the examination room. During breakfast, my son excitedly told me about his last day of school. I knew he went on a field trip to the museum. I signed the permission slip for it after all. But all my son could talk about was the gingerbread men his class made in the morning. I kept on trying to ask him what his favorite dinosaur exhibit was. But all my son could talk about was his newfound interest in baking. The house phone rang. My wife picked it up. Whatever was being said on the other line made her visibly uncomfortable. But when she came back to the table, she simply resumed eating. It wasn't until my son went outside to play with his friends, she told me the school called. One of my son's classmates suddenly died. The teachers were calling the parents to let them know. Chelsea Steeler? I asked. She immediately noticed the beginning of a conversation she didn't want to have. Let's not tell him until after Christmas. Let him be a kid for a little longer. I didn't argue. I didn't share the details of what I found inside of Steeler's body. Instead, I told my wife that there was some last-minute paperwork I had to take care of on the examination room before I fully clocked out for the holidays. It wasn't entirely a lie. I did spend some time going through the autopsy report, making sure it didn't sound completely mad. But it wasn't the reason I drove back to work that day. My real reasons were lying face down in a glass jar. Yet when I took the jar out, the gingerbread men weren't lying down. They were pressed against the glass, facing the outside world. But there was no doubt in my mind the creatures had shifted. They had somehow stood up in my absence and were looking out into the world with their slitted eyes. For a moment I stood there, confounded by the blood-covered baked goods staring back at me. Yet the longer I stood in the empty examination room, the more I thought about my family. Beyond the corpses, beyond the ripped-up muscle and flesh, I had a family. Back home, my wife and son were waiting for me. I closed the cupboard that held the gingerbread men, shut off the lights, and drove back home. It was difficult to keep the malformed creatures out of my head on the drive back. But as soon as I got past my front door, the mysteries of my professional life dissipated beneath the sheer pleasure of spending time with my family. After lunch, the three of us went outside to build a snowman. 2 big eyes of Christmas ornaments, a thick carrot nose, and a wide grin of coal. The creature that my son had constructed wiped away any memory of the harrowing gingerbread men in the examination room. Once the snowman in our front yard had been completed and the sun had set, the three of us settled down on the couch and watched a Christmas movie. I scarcely paid attention to what was on the television. Whatever was on the screen was irrelevant. Just a big backdrop to a calm evening spent with those that I loved. It wasn't until my wife and I were falling asleep I thought about my work again. Just as she drifted off to sleep, she mentioned we should have a talk with our son about bullying. While I was off finishing my paperwork, my son told my wife about one of his classmates tormenting the daughter of the weird religious lady. Apparently, the bully had taken the girl's gingerbread man and ate it in front of the whole class, embarrassing the poor girl. Christine Morgan's daughter? I asked. Probably, my wife said, yawning. Was the bully Chelsea Steeler? I asked. I don't know, he didn't use names, she said, yawning again. We should tell him about standing up for the weaker kids. For a moment, I thought about breaking the unspoken rule of my marriage and telling my wife about the 2 corpses in the examination room. But that moment dragged on too long. By the time I started to whisper my worries, she was already asleep. My mind was still desperately trying to make connections between the 2 bodies and their gruesome deaths, but I forced my eyes shut and tried to get some rest. I hoped that some sleep would help me forget about the gingerbread men. It didn't. I woke up drenched in sweat with my heart racing. In my dreams, I saw my family sitting in the kitchen making gingerbread men. My wife and son seemed so happy, so full of life, so innocent. Yet the cookies they made shared none of their joy. Slitted eyes and maws of crimson stared back at me from the kitchen table. Slitted eyes that blinked and maws that chomped. Before I could warn them, before I could save my family, the gingerbread man leapt into action. Soon enough, my wife and son were gone. And all that remained of them was blood and mangled skin. Seeing the kitchen clean and free of death brought a tiny bit of calmness to my mind, but I knew that what I truly needed was sleep. With a generous helping of sleeping pills and a nightcap, I returned back to bed. At first, the thoughts of Morgan and Steeler stuck in my mind, but soon enough I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. I woke up to an empty bed that morning. For a moment, past the chemically induced grogginess of my slumber, I found myself worrying about my family being kidnapped by a group of possessed gingerbread men. Walking down to the kitchen and finding my wife and son safe and sound calmed me somewhat. The calmness didn't last. They were baking gingerbread. Their creations were unlike the ones I had seen in my dreams. The cookie men they made were cheery and happy and full of pep. That didn't matter to me. All I could think about were those slitted eyes and screaming maws. All I could think about were the 2 gingerbread men standing in my office, waiting. They invited me to join in on the baking, but I busied myself with beer and television. I hoped that alcohol and channel hopping would distract me, yet all I could think about were the bodies. Regardless of how much I drank or how loud the Christmas music blaring from the television was, all I could think about was Morgan, Steeler, and the cookie men that were lodged in their broken corpses. My mind trying to find some semblance of reason in a bewildering world. Daddy, I made you something. My son's voice cut through my frenzied internal monologue. In his hands, he held a little gingerbread man with a bushy mustache and glasses. The facial hair was made of green frosting, and the glasses were far too big for the man's face, but I could tell that the gingerbread man was meant to be a representation of me. Do you go to school with Grace Morgan? I asked him. He seemed confused by the question, but eventually he nodded. Did Grace ever talk about her mother? Did they get along? I asked him. Gracie's mom was mean, my son said. When the class went to the museum, Gracie's mom was standing outside yelling at us. But did Grace ever talk about her mother? Did you think Grace would ever want to hurt her? Would Grace ever want to hurt Chelsea Steeler? Well, Gracie's mom didn't let her come to the museum with us, and Chelsea was always mean to Gracie, my son said, unsure of my questions. Do you like this gingerbread man I made you? I didn't. Even though the cookie held an innocent smile and was made by the most important person in my life, I could barely look at it. Yet, as uncomfortable as I was, the pride in my son's eyes was undeniable. I accepted the cookie. I knew full well that the effigy in my hand was a product of love, but all I could imagine was the little gingerbread man tearing through my insides. Are you going to eat it, Dad? He asked. Promise it's not bad. Mom, help me. I almost told him I wasn't hungry or that I would eat the cookie later, but the pride in my son's eyes was undeniable. The pride in my son's eyes was more important than the fear in the pit of my stomach. In one swift motion, I decapitated the gingerbread man with my teeth. Once I was sure his head was crushed enough not to do me any harm, I drowned the chunks of gingerbread with a gulp of beer. Tasty, I said, but I wasn't able to mask my discomfort. That evening, as my wife and I wrapped up the Christmas presents, she asked me if I was all right. Both her and my son had noticed that something was bothering me. That evening, she was willing to talk about my problems, be they work-related or not. Yet by then, my fear of the gingerbread men had grown to such an intensity that I couldn't put it into words. I just told her that work has been a bit more stressful than usual this year, but that I would be fine eventually. She asked me if I wanted to talk about it. I didn't. I couldn't. But she tried to get me to open up a couple more times. Eventually, with the lights off and the presents packed beneath the tree, I was left alone with my thoughts. My thoughts were singular. I shouldn't have been driving that night. I had drank enough throughout the day for it to have been a bad idea, and to make things worse, there was a powerful blizzard that swept through the town that Christmas Eve. Yet I knew that unless I got some closure, I wouldn't be able to sleep. I drove through the curtain of snow until I could see the faint lights of the Christian Springs morgue. The absurdity of it all was a steady drumbeat in the back of my head, but it wasn't until I was standing in the darkness of my office that I consciously acknowledged how insane my trip was. There was nothing to be achieved from our closer examination. Morgan and Steeler were dead. There was nothing I could do to bring them back. I almost convinced myself to turn around and go back home. Almost. Just as I was about to turn around and walk away, I heard something. I heard the faintest of taps coming from the cupboard in which I kept the gingerbread men. Tap, tap, tap. Like little claws knocking on glass. Tap, tap, tap. Like little gingerbread men trying to make their way out. Tap, tap, tap. With my heart in my throat, I opened the cupboard. Stuck in their glass prison, the two gingerbread men stood there, staring straight at me. They were no longer standing in the spread-out pose in which I first found them. Each of them had one of their blood-caked limbs extended, as if they were about to knock on the glass again. I stared at them, waiting for them to move again, waiting for something to happen that would convince me I had not gone insane. In the dim light of my office, I thought I could see their eyes twitch. I thought I could see the slightest bit of stifled movement in their mouths. But before I could steady myself to properly look, my phone rang. It's my wife. She woke up in the middle of the night to find her husband missing, to find the car missing. She asked two questions. She asked whether I was safe and whether I was having an affair. The implication that I would be capable of being unfaithful hurt me. But as I assured her that I would never break our marriage vows, I realized how far I had let my mind drift. I closed the cupboard, slid down to the floor of the examination room, and told her everything. I told her about Steeler and Morgan's unfathomable internal damage. I told her about the gingerbread men. I told her about how scared I was. She listened patiently. With each word that left my lips, with each part of my insane story that I described, I found myself less and less scared. The cause of death was still a mystery, but the pure act of explaining the gingerbread men theory made it seem inconceivable. The murderous gingerbread men were not real. What was real was my worried wife who was waiting for me at home. Once I was all talked out, she asked me to come home. I did. As I shut off the lights and left the examination room, however, the tiniest bit of doubt slithered into my mind. Tap, tap, tap. I ignored it. Drove back home. The steadily rotating cast of extended family members that came through our house kept me occupied for the next couple of days. All worries of murderous gingerbread men disappeared beneath the fear that my mother-in-law inspired within me. But the fear wasn't something that haunted my dreams. That fear was manageable. When my wife and I decided to tell our son about Chelsea Steeler, he didn't seem overly concerned. Apparently his friends had already told him. Just about everyone from his class knew as soon as the playground rumor mill got going. He just never brought it up because he knew that Mommy didn't like talking about death in the house. Kid seemed pretty comfortable about the concept of mortality, but what can one expect from a child whose father works with the police? A day before New Year's, I got called back into work. Another overdose from a town nearby. The ghastly gingerbread men had left my mind completely by then. I simply co-signed them to a part of some minor mental breakdown, yet when I entered the examination room, the thoughts of those slitted eyes came flooding back. The cupboard was opened. There was broken glass on the floor. The gingerbread man had escaped. The gingerbread man had escaped. I spent most of January sleepless. I kept on thinking that somehow those two strange creatures made of gingerbread would come and they would track me down. It hurt my family and me because I was aware of their existence. They didn't. Life carried on as normal. My boss agreed that Morgan and Steeler's injuries were difficult to explain, but he also insisted that they were not important enough to investigate. After the first day of classes, my son informed me that Grace Morgan left town to go live with her grandparents, and that no one was particularly sad when the school bully disappeared off campus. Once it became clear that no murderous baked goods were coming after me and my family, the thoughts of those slitted-eyed creatures drifted away into the realm of pointless mystery. I still don't understand what I saw the Christmas of 2003, but I have resigned myself to the fact that I'll never understand. Somehow, however, I find myself sitting in a bar after a medical examiner conference, and colleagues start sharing their stories of the bizarre and the unexplained. I tell them my tale of the gingerbread man. And sometimes, when the booze is flowing freely and people's tongues loosen, they tell me that I'm not the only coroner who found baked goods inside of a mangled corpse. My work requires that I often go on business trips. I like the job, I like meeting new people, I like visiting new cities. But for this story, that's neither here nor there. I just arrived in Chicago and settled down in a place that you could probably call high class. I'd personally never shell out the exorbitant funds required for these sorts of things, but if the company's paying, then I won't complain. One night I'd come back drunk as hell after a night out with clients. At some point during the AM hours, I went into the bathroom and slipped on some water, falling into the wall space between the toilet and the shower. I stuck out my arm, but it actually went straight through. I wasn't sure why such a fancy place used such fragile materials for their restrooms, but this oddity really didn't seem right. The fall wasn't that hard. I couldn't understand how it broke so easily. So I stepped back, staring at the gaping, newly formed hole. I wasn't exactly sure how hotels were designed in relation to how much space is between the rooms, but I was under the impression that they're built side by side. And if that was the case, there must now be a hole in my neighbor's closet or something, which is rather concerning. It was late as hell, so I decided to wait until the morning to tell them about it, so they didn't freak out and think I was some weird asshole making holes in the walls. The morning comes and I knock on their door. They open up and are mostly understanding about what happened. They take a look around each of their rooms, but there's no hole anywhere. Alright, thought to myself, don't have to worry about anything there. But I still have to tell the front desk or something. I wasn't really prepared to pay for the damages, though, so stop being so fucking cheap with your building, you know? However, I decided to put it off until after all my work was done. So I come back the following night, take a look at the hole again, and it was really big. And out of curiosity, I took my phone's flashlight and shined it through. If it didn't lead to a room, then what was it? You know, just a random space in between? The first thing I saw was an old-looking notebook lying around. Interesting. I reached in and picked it up, wiping a thin layer of dust off of it. It wasn't really distinctive looking, just a plain red notebook. One you could probably buy anywhere. But it was the contents inside that were disconcerting. It was just pages and pages of messily scribbled nonsense. At least that's what I thought it was at first. There was definitely a pattern in the haphazard symbols on the page. Another language, maybe? I don't know. Occasionally there would be diagrams. These were easier to understand. Still rather cryptic. They looked like detailed outlines of a building. After a few seconds of looking it through, I came to the definitive conclusion it was the hotel. What caught my eyes was the 15th floor, which was labeled more clearly than the others. There was what looked like a staircase descending down from one of the rooms, cutting through the floor below. I mean, it didn't really show or describe where it was supposed to lead. The only word at the end of the staircase was Zone CKX9. Now, I'm not sure how many nope situations you've been in, but this probably fit the bill. Despite that, I just kept looking through the hole, just in case it was anything else. And there certainly was. With dead candles scattered all about it, there appeared to be a trap door. My blood kind of froze there. Was I supposed to deduce that it led to a fucking staircase on the 15th floor? Eventually, I kind of just forced myself to laugh at it. I mean, there's no way, right? I made a decision right then and there. I started tearing down the wall some more, just so that I could get enough space to crawl through into the hidden room. It really wasn't bigger than a walk-in closet. Unfurnished wooden floors, walls, and ceilings with that weird trap door in the middle. I took a moment of hesitation before opening it. I mean, if there was actually a staircase, there was no chance in hell I was going down there. I reached down and grabbed the metal handle. I searched around for a lock, but it wasn't there. I finally lifted it up, not really knowing what to expect. There was only blackness at first, and then I shined my light down. Stairs. Inexplicably, there were stairs. It shocked me so much that I instinctively closed it. I sat there for a moment, astounded. I started believing that it was just some weird illusion. With that in mind, I opened it up again and carefully stuck my hand down. Not a solid surface. They really were stairs. I spent the next few hours trying to figure out what could have been underneath my room. I asked around, I did research, even went down a floor to see for myself, but everything yielded the same conclusion. It was just supposed to be another room. I knocked on the door of the person that I had mapped out to be right below me, but nobody answered. I even did some research online, no similar experiences to mine. In this situation, I did the one thing that I thought was appropriate. I went to my coworker, Jacob's room, told him about it. At first, he was a bit bothered that I knocked on his door at 1 a.m., but I knew that he'd be interested in this. He was one of those brash, paranormal aficionado guys. A bit annoying at times, but I'd say that we were friendly enough. After I explained the situation to him, he let out a skeptical and somewhat obnoxious laugh. He still elected to come check it out. And during the walk-up, I was slightly concerned it was going to be one of those situations where it just disappears or some shit. But when we got to my bathroom, it was still there. Still weird as ever. When I opened it up and revealed the stairs, I could see a look of sheer shock drawn across his face. I doubt he'd ever experienced anything paranormal before, despite the stories he always tells. This was uncharted territory for the both of us. We mused for a few more hours, deliberating on whether or not to go down. Well, it was actually just Jacob trying to convince me to go down with him. Come on, I remember him telling me. What a fucking story. For whatever reason, he was adamant about going through with this insane bullshit. Eventually, I agreed to go down like 10 steps and then right back up, just to see what was going on. We opened our flashlights, and he went first. As soon as my body descended into whatever the hell this place was, I could feel the atmosphere shift around me. It's hard to explain, but it wasn't like when your ears pop at high altitudes. It was something else. I went down the 10 steps that I'd promised before stopping and analyzing my surroundings. It wasn't like I could see much, though. It was just dark. Incomprehensibly dark. I watched as Jacob went further and further down. Are you sure this is a good idea? I said to him. None of this makes any sense. He goes down probably another 8 steps further than me before turning. Dude, this is crazy. You coming? Fuck that. I told him. What kind of place is this? As I said this, his expression drops. What? I ask him. Do you hear that? He responds. I strained my ears, trying to figure out what he was referring to. It was faint, but there. Water? I couldn't really tell if it sounded more like somebody was sloshing around ankle deep or if they were flat out swimming, but it was extremely far down. causing me to wonder how deep this place was. And then Jakob did the stupidest thing anybody could have done in that scenario. He yells out, "Who's there?" And in the near utter silence of this apparently massive room, it echoes like hell. It was quiet after that. Quiet. No more movement. Whatever was down there had reacted. What happened next nearly gave me a heart attack. Heavy, wet footsteps began sprinting up the stairs. They were still faint at first, but they gained an inhuman pace. Jakob and I followed suit, scrambling the hell back up. He stumbled back into the room, closed the door behind us, and as soon as we did this, the footsteps ceased again. We didn't have peace of mind yet. There was no lock, and the door isn't so heavy. Jakob quickly lugged the coffee table through the washroom, back into the hidden room, and then placed it upside down on top of the trap door. After that, we just stood there, breathless. We glanced at each other, both of our minds probably on the same page. There were still 3 days on this trip. I didn't really get much sleep that night. I mean, even with a drawer barricading the bathroom door, I kind of wish I'd grabbed the book back there. Maybe I could have analyzed it further, uncovering any possible answers, but for obvious reasons, I don't think going back down there is the best idea right now. Working the holidays has been something of a tradition of mine over the past few years. I don't have family that I need to run home to, and the pay is really not that bad, all things considered. Plus, best of all, typically, most people don't call us this time of year. Sure, there's the occasional drunk driver or something, but the most part, we have a small office party where we chill without too much stress. This year, I didn't anticipate much to be different. There are about 6 of us handling incoming calls on Christmas Eve, and it looked like cold weather would be hitting the area soon, so we did anticipate a few calls from stranded motorists, maybe the occasional ice slide or something like that. Marty, our shift manager, bought us all Domino's pizza and Coca-Cola. I popped on my headset, waited for the calls to come in. First few hours were mundane, just as I expected. I'm not going to bore you with the details. Let's skip forward to about 1500 in the evening. This call came in about that time. I remember because I had just come back from break. There were only 5 of us left, I think. Somebody had to drive for a while, and the weather was getting worse. The calls began to increase. And then I pick up the receiver. I talk to an old lady, probably in her late 90s. I'm just saying, that to be fair. "Hello? Is this Daniel?" she asked in a confused voice. For a split second, I was tempted to promptly tell her that she had the wrong number, but training kicked in, and I realized she might be suffering from dementia. She might be in need of aid. "This is 911, ma'am. Are you in need of assistance? Can you provide your address?" I asked. "Daniel, I'm trying to set up the Christmas tree. Darn thing keeps tipping over," she mumbled. They heard cats in the background and something that sounded like pots banging together. "I see. Is anyone else there with you, ma'am?" I asked slowly as I typed up a short response on my computer. I didn't expect this to be a lengthy call at all. "You were supposed to be here, and you never came," she said, in a harsher tone than I expected. "How will I ever explain to the children you weren't here to open presents?" she whispered. "So there are children in the house?" I asked. "Not yet, but they will come. They always do," the woman replied cryptically. In the background, I heard what sounded like a man laughing. "So there is someone there with you?" I repeated my first question, to which I heard her shuffle her feet and mutter something. "That was the TV. Why are you asking so many questions? Are you coming to help me with the tree or not?" she barked. "This line is for emergencies only. I hate to say that Christmas tree alignment is in our department," I told her, and added, "You should try to call Daniel tomorrow. Get some rest tonight, okay, ma'am?" I noticed that for some reason the call wasn't being picked up on our maps. The signal kept bouncing around on the rurals, making the likelihood of me being able to send officers out for a wellness check very unlikely. There was a short silence, as though she was processing my words. Then she whispered, "But if you go, who's going to help me? The presents aren't even finished yet. This will be the worst Christmas ever." I sighed and tried to be patient with her. Already my phone was buzzing with other calls, and I had to move on. I'm sure it will be fine. Didn't you say that there were going to be children coming by? They won't care about the wrappings as much, just the gifts, and, of course, being with you, I commented. The gifts have to be ready before they come. Have you forgotten everything, Daniel? She barked back. Then I heard the doorbell ring in the background. There they are. No, I'm not ready, she mumbled. There was a few confusing sounds, and the line went dead. I sat there for a few moments, a bit perplexed by the incident, and then finished up the short report, and I tried to move on. Once I got a short break, I turned to my coworker Matt and said, any crazy calls tonight? If you, are we taking score? He asked me with a smirk. Just trying to figure out this one I got. Just old lady sounded like she had dementia. Couldn't pinpoint her call, though. Matt looked at me weirdly. Wait, did she mention something about a Christmas tree? A man named Daniel? He asked. Yeah. Oh my god, you got her too? Last year. Listen, I know this sounds weird, but next time she calls, just hang up. He told me. Wait, what? Is she some kind of troublemaker? I asked. Before he could respond, the next call came in, and I turned back to my desk. 911, what is your emergency? Daniel, the Christmas tree is all decorated now. I don't have any gifts for the children, though. I sighed and remembered what Matt had told me, but didn't want to be rude. As gently as I could, I told her that she was mistaken, and she had the wrong number. If you leave me now, I don't think the children will like it, she whispered back. That sounded odd, so I asked, I thought they already came by. I told them the gifts weren't ready, so they gave me more time. But I lied. I don't have anything. They'll know I'm lying. Ma'am, you aren't making any sense. Who are these children? I don't know, damn it! Daniel, you've seen them! Their horrible faces and their razor-sharp teeth. They come every year. I just don't have the energy to stop them this time. I leaned forward, hearing the man laughing in the background again, and I asked, Ma'am, are you trying to say you're in danger? If so, just respond with the phrase, I need more time, okay? There was silence again, and the sound of scratching. It was either on the door or under her feet. I need more time, she whispered back. And the line went dead. Taking my headphones off, I quickly sent a transcript of the call to Marty and messaged him to come over to my station. What's up, Gail? He said, glancing at the screen. Is there any way we could figure out where this call is coming from? I think this elderly woman needs help immediately. It might be difficult. I reviewed the call, though. There isn't much to be going on, he told me. But something isn't right. Matt said that she called every year. Apparently these kids harass her. They might be taking advantage of her mental illness, I told him. Yeah, well, I'll see what I can do, he promised. As he walked away, Matt swiveled his chair toward me. Don't tell me you're still talking to that woman, he said. Doesn't the strike you as odd she calls in regularly on Christmas? I asked. All I know is when she called me, it freaked me out. First, she started talking about Daniel. Then she wasn't making sense at all. Frightened me, to be honest, he said. And you just chalked it up to what, madness? Gail, who knows? Clearly, she isn't in any danger if she's doing it again. So don't let it get to you. You forget the whole thing. But that didn't happen because 20 minutes later, she called again. This time when she called me Daniel, I corrected her. Oh, that's right. Daniel's dead, isn't he? He was a good boy. Always did what he was told. Helped me a lot around the holidays. I was beginning to form the picture that this Daniel probably also died around this time of year. Maybe that was why the holidays were harder for her. How did he die? I asked her. Same way they all die, I suppose. There was a lump in my throat because of her response. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to explain what you mean by that. I told you before, I don't have gifts to give them. I had to give them something. So, you let them have Daniel? She didn't respond. Instead, I heard the strange scratching again and the laughter. What am I supposed to do? They won't leave me alone. I need an address. I'll send someone out there. You can't come. They'll just kill you. Please, Let me help you. Only Daniel could help me, and he's gone now. Gone forever. The scratching was growing louder, and so was the laughter. I realized it sounded like children playing. Then let me be Daniel for you. I can be Daniel. I wasn't sure if what I was saying made sense to her, but after another moment of silence, she said, "You would do that for me?" I told her yes, and finally got an address. "Now I need you to stay on the line with me. I'm going to get professionals there as soon as possible." Suddenly, she screamed like she was being attacked. "What's going on? Is someone else there?" I asked. The laughter was drowning out her screams as I heard the children excitedly crying out. And then I heard awful sounds like they were the ones hurting this poor woman. I snapped my fingers to Matt excitedly and jotted a quick sticky note for him to tell the dispatchers to book it. Despite his misgivings from earlier, he obeyed my instructions. "Ma'am, are you okay? I can't hear anything. What's going on?" I asked. The screams were making my ears hurt. And then just when I thought I couldn't take anymore, the line went dead. I tried to reconnect, but suddenly the line was out of service. Whatever was going on here, I was in the dark. I didn't find out much until the paramedics returned. Marty called me into his office. "Well, what did you learn? Was the woman okay?" I asked. "I'm not sure what kind of prank this was, Gail, but it was weird. It was a long drive out there for nothing." For nothing? What do you mean?" "The address you gave us was a smoldering pile of ash. Old fire, probably from 3 or 4 years ago. Nothing but debris. Certainly no woman," paramedic told. "Well, that's impossible. I talked to her only an hour ago. Maybe she gave the wrong address," I asked. "Who knows? Looks like it was pretty bad, though. Several small corpses inside, too. Might have been children's home, something back in the day. Children." It lined up with what I'd heard. Had I been talking to a ghost? Thanks for at least checking it out," I told him. I returned to my desk and told Matt what had happened. "Not surprised. It was a prank. Something doesn't feel right about it, though. I can't put my finger on it," I admitted as I placed my headset back on and started taking calls again. 911, what's your emergency?" No response. Then I heard heavy breathing, like someone was struggling to get words out. "Daniel, you didn't come." A chill ran down my spine as I became filled with dread. It sounded like she was dying, or perhaps she was already dead. "What happened?" I whispered. "I stopped them. All of them. They're dead now, and so am I. Maybe I can protect others from their evil this way," she asked, as I heard her cough and vomit. "You burned your house?" I said. "Won't be long before I'm forgotten. So these wicked little creatures will be gone too. All of them back down to hell." She coughed again, her voice becoming weaker. "Why did they do this? What do they want?" The line went dead again, and I realized it was the end of my shift. I grabbed my keys and decided to take a drive out there and find out the truth for myself. It took almost half an hour, and the weather was more brutal than I expected, but when I made it, the image was not exactly what the paramedics had claimed. There was no fire, just a quaint little house that was remote from anything else in these woods. Instead, it reminded me of the storybook workshop you might see at A Christmas Tale, to be honest. I parked my car and zipped up my coat, walking to the door and knocking loudly. I could hear children inside. An old woman that looked like she had come off of a Norman Rockwell painting came to the door. She appeared to be blind, crippled. "Who is it at this hour?" "It's Daniel," I lied, as I peeked inside the house. It was dark. I could faintly see a Christmas tree and some food on the table, and I kept hearing laughter. "Oh dear, please come in. I waited for you." I followed her into the cramped corridor toward the tree. Something smelled awful, like a rotting corpse was hiding under the spruce. "Do your lights not work?" I asked as I felt the children get uncomfortably close to me. Their hands felt dirty and old. "Hush now. We need to begin our festival," the old woman told me. Then she lit a match. I opened my mouth to ask what she was doing, but then tossed the match into the Christmas tree, igniting it in seconds. As the flame blazed, the room around me became clear. All of her children, if you could even call them that, were naked and resembled old men, growling and snarling as they began to attack me with jagged teeth and twisted nails. The old woman laughed madly, and I saw an older man in the background, his belly carved out, probably from a previous meal given to these little demons. I managed to pull myself up and push the tree down, the mighty spruce hitting the old woman harshly before I dashed towards the door. The demon children were right behind me, cackling like wild animals as the fire spread. I made it back to my car and watched as the tiny home went up in a blaze, fulfilling the words that my coworker had claimed they saw. I made sure none of those awful lads made it out of the home, and sat there gasping for breath in the cold as the fire died down until only ash was left. I cranked up my car and called it a night, my body still numb to the entire experience. The day after, I had a morning shift, and some of my coworkers were asking about the call, but I didn't want to even bother to recall the incident. I sat down tiredly beside another dispatcher, saying a prayer that the nightmare would end. Then I heard them answer their phone and repeat what I had said to the old woman the night before. Snatching the headset off, I disconnected the call before they got roped in as well. "What was that about?" they asked. "If that lady calls again, don't answer." I paused and realized that would likely mean that others in the office would be in danger too. "Tell anyone if a woman calls asking for Daniel, forward that call to me," I ordered. I sat back against my chair, skin bristling with pain as I waited for the call. I'll just have to make it past the holidays. Then she'll stop. Until next year. A ghost in the machine. That phrase always fascinated me, mostly because I could never understand what it truly meant. When I was younger, I thought it had something to do with a haunted computer. And while that is still an interesting concept in and of itself, I don't quite think that's what we're dealing with here. Consciousness is a distinct entity from the physical body, both connected in some ambiguous manner that we haven't quite figured out yet. So, is the human mind just a ghost pervading a biological machine? Does that mean that ghosts are real? Sorry if this train of thought seems to have derailed. I'm trying my best here. I'm having trouble comprehending what's just happened to me. At the moment, I was looking for something fun to do. I've always tried my best not to make a name for myself whenever I make my excursion into the forbidden cyberspace, so I couldn't get too crazy. Trust me, you don't want that. I suppose that I was just looking for something to read, possibly some conspiracy theories that were backed up by tangible evidence, but I found something else. Something a lot more intriguing. I was on a forum that was a hotspot for cyberpunk buffs. It was a place where geeks got together and shared developments from each tech industry that spanned the globe. I know there's a lot of these on the surface web, but this one was also frequented by hackers. Hackers who like to break into corporate systems in order to steal knowledge. Can't find a subreddit for that. There was one discussion thread that caught my eye immediately. Found an experimental AI. Now, I'm no expert in technical jargon, but I'll try my best to explain what this was all about. So these artificial intelligences were referred to as EGs, an abbreviation for extracted ghosts. The hacker who had found this explained it in far more explicit detail, but he lost me after a few sentences. I knew how to code, sure, but this far exceeded the scope of what I would have been able to understand. Something that even the hacker found relatively strange was the fact that he'd never heard about the company that created this thing before. It appeared to be some kind of startup situation in southern Germany that went by the name of NT. Didn't know what it stood for, he simply looked through the code and found it worthwhile enough to share. He put up a link for us to download it, and to my surprise, it was an Android mobile app. I assumed that he'd probably just found a prototype in the earliest stages of beta testing. I knew that this link probably wasn't the safest thing ever. That's why I dug around and found an old, never-before-used phone that had been lying around. It was still a reasonably new Samsung model, but I wasn't too afraid of losing it. I plugged it in and began the download. The download itself was rather tedious. I had to restart the phone about 3 times, and the overall process took an hour and a half. In fact, it was so big that I essentially had to delete every pre-existing file, but in the end, I ultimately managed to do it. There was now another app on the device. The name was just a string of letters and numbers, while the icon was simply white. Prototype indeed, I thought to myself. I opened it up, eager to see what this would lead to. The opening screen was what appeared to be a language selection. Cantonese, Mandarin, Japanese, Korean, English, Spanish, French, and German. Of course, I clicked on English. Once I did that, it took me to a loading screen. As the bar crept higher and higher, I could see what I assumed to be a code flashing across the screen in intervals. Obviously, I was expecting there to be bugs, so this wasn't really a cause for concern. It fully booted up about 5 minutes later. The background was almost completely empty, save for a few icons. A camera symbol, an audio symbol, and what appeared to be a box to type into. A message also appeared onto the screen. Hello, my name is Lane. I chuckled, that was cute. I contemplated what to respond with before deciding to go with something simple. Hello, Lane. What do you do? It only took a few seconds for another message to pop up. I am here to assist you in extreme situations. That was interesting, to say the least. What do you mean by that? Situations where the possibility of death or injury are present. This must be some kind of mobile game, I thought to myself. But how early in development was it? It only seemed to be text-based so far, so in any case, I decided to keep on humoring it. How are you supposed to do that? This time, the response took a little longer. Insert headphones, then press the camera icon. As long as I have visible access to your surroundings, I will be able to help you. Just listen to what I say. Now, these instructions were still extremely vague. I couldn't really think of a situation where I'd be able to use it, so I just pushed it into the back of my head for the time being. It was Saturday night and I wanted to get wasted. Before going out, I brought the phone with me, just in case, The night went on as you expected, paying too much for drinks at the bar, almost taking a girl home, but falling short when I realized I didn't have enough money for the cab. I decided to take the train home instead. I was sitting there, drunk out of my mind, preparing myself for what was surely going to be a dull trip home. It only took me a few moments to realize that my night might not end up going so well. The train was nearly empty, save for a few tipsy college kids sitting at the other end. However, there were 2 people sitting right across from me, faces both obscured by their hoods. They'd been intermittently glancing at me ever since I got onto the train. Now, I was never one to judge, but I was also a cheap bastard. I wasn't down to have my shit jacked. Things got worse when the college kids got off at the next stop. These guys were starting to look antsy. Now, it's not like anything was guaranteed to happen here. I could only make an assumption, but sometimes assumptions need to be made. I remember the AI's message. Situations where the possibility of death or injury are present. This must fit under that category, right? Trying to be as casual as possible, I pulled out the phone. I opened the app, I put my headphones in, and I opened the camera icon. As soon as I did this, another message popped up. They will try to rob you within the next 1 minute. My heart jumped. Geez, really? My thumb slid all over the screen as I made an attempt to respond, but that didn't turn out to be necessary. Please relax. Press the audio icon. Put me in a position where I can see everything, and I'll figure out the rest. I simply did as I was told. Luckily, I'd worn a plaid shirt with a breast pocket that was just deep enough so the camera was not obscured as I slid it in. However, as soon as I did this, the 2 men got up. Are you recording us? One of them asked, in an overly agitated tone. I'd only been in 2 fights in my life, and I'd lost both of them. I babbled out some incoherent bullshit before I heard a voice come through my headphones. It was jarring. It wasn't the generic, mechanicalized voice that you could just tell were pre-recorded syllables that had been spliced together. It was real. It sounded like a real person with real tone, real inflections in their voice. It sounded like a young woman. How was this possible? But at the moment, I didn't have time to think about it. There were more pressing issues at hand. Stand up. Take 2 steps to your left, is what she said. And I listened. Hey, fucker! What do you want from us? The other man demanded. Don't say anything, the voice told me. He'll attempt to strike you in 3 seconds after I'm done talking. Start moving your head to the left. I listened, and it worked. I dodged the punch. His jaw is exposed. Swing your right arm upwards. It worked again. The back of my fist made a brutal connection with the right side of his jaw. The man staggered backwards. He cursed loudly. Shit! The voice continued. Stomp your heel onto his left foot. I just kept going. In the end, the two men were out cold. They'd managed to hit me a few times, but Lane's directions minimized the damage that I could have taken. I looked down at my bruised, bloody knuckles in sheer awe of what had just happened. The cops came, they took my statement, everything went as expected after that. I went home. I laid in bed, simply contemplating what I'd just stumbled upon. I decided to check back on the forum thread, but it seemed to have been taken down. Should this have been a cause for concern? I mean, possibly, but at that moment, I was on a sheer adrenaline high. Every other thought in my head was being blocked out. I opened up the app again and typed in another question. What are you? I am an artificial intelligence that is currently being developed by the NT Corporation. I am currently in my 4th testing phase. I didn't know why I was typing. I got close to the speaker and said my next question out loud instead. What is the NT Corporation? This time, the response took a while, and her tone was one of relative confusion. I can't answer that. They only ever told me the name. I didn't quite know how to respond here. I mean, what the hell was this? Eventually, the momentary adrenaline rush ceased. Now, in a more rational state of mind, I really started to think about where this was going, and it couldn't be anywhere good. This conjecture was proved true a few minutes later. Lane spoke up again. After some analysis, I've come to the conclusion those weren't cops. My blood freezes at this. Then, who are they? Another delayed response. They must have known you were talking to me. They want to know how you have access to me. You aren't supposed to. I consider my next inquiry before asking it. Am I in danger? This time, her response is immediate. Yes. As if on cue, the familiar blue and red lights suddenly start bleeding in through my curtains. I peek out, seeing 2 officers that had just questioned me, now making their way into the building. Wait 2 minutes. Jump off the balcony, then start heading right. Don't drive your car. Lane's sudden voice makes me flinch. Even though I'm on the 2nd floor, I'm still hesitant to go through with it. My heart starts pounding. I'm inclined to believe that she somehow detects this. I know you're scared, she says to me. Remember, I'm here to help you. Her voice is calming now. Her tone nearly sickly sweet. I trust her. Don't I? I start hearing footsteps coming down my hallway. Without wasting any more time, I grab my keys, wallet, and other cell phone. Then I open my balcony door. Here goes nothing. Take the next left. Lane's voice echoes in my brain as I run. She's directing me, but I can't fathom where. I'm trying, but she claims that we can't rest. I take a quick glance around, but I see nothing. There's nobody here, I say in between exhausted pants. Why are we still going? I'm trying to maximize your chance of escaping. If you stop now, they'll find us in 8 minutes. We're in a deserted part of town. Old, decrepit apartment buildings line each sidewalk while streetlights flicker on and off. Unfavorable conditions, to say the least. Shouldn't we head to a more crowded place? It's 6 a.m. At this time, there is none. I didn't even realize how late it was. Shit. Crowded locations are where they would look first, she continues. They think like you do. That's how they'll find you. The absurdity of this has barely dawned on me. How the fuck can this be an AI? Eventually, I simply can't go any longer. I stop abruptly, bending over to catch fleeting breaths of air. I can't. I need to stop. That's all right. You've bought yourself around 21 minutes. 21 minutes? How do you know? I asked her. It's only an estimation based off facial, physical, and proximity analysis. What the hell is that supposed to mean? But I don't bother asking it out loud. Unlikely that I'd understand anyway. Call a cab, she says. Get in. Have the driver go a distance of 4 blocks northwest. Before you can get out, leave your other phone in there. Oh shit, I thought. I brought my damn phone with me. What was this, fucking amateur hour? I did as I was told. The taxi arrived in 12 minutes. As soon as the driver dropped me off, Lane tells me to start walking downtown. So that's what I do. At this point, the streets have started to fill up more. Not a lot of people, but enough to make it not feel empty. As I walk, Lane points something out. There's a man about 30 feet in front of you wearing a blue jacket. He's part of the team chasing you. Turn left on the next street, then start running. Shit. I turn at the next left and start running again. I take intermittent looks over my shoulder, but it doesn't look like anybody's following me. They're hiding, Lane tells me. They're good at that. At some point, she tells me to duck into an internet cafe. Once there, she makes me wait for 10 minutes. I have everything that we need to survive now. Just keep listening. You're doing great so far. As she speaks, I made an active attempt to detect anything off about the way that she was speaking to me. Any semblance of insincerity or manipulation, but there's none. To me, she sounds genuine. This is frightening. Once we leave the restaurant, she points out a blue Impala sitting on the side of the road just in front of me. It's still running. You have about 3 minutes before the owner comes out. We need to take it. I start to object. Look, I can't fucking do that. Lane's once soft voice begins to heat up. Less than 3 minutes now. They've caught up to you. I turn around, immediately noticing a police officer barely behind us. He seems to be walking with intent. Don't rush, Lane says. Calmly enter and start driving away. I take about 10 more seconds to think this over. If she's lying, then I'll be fucked later on. But if she's not lying, I'll be fucked right now. Call it impulsive. Call it a foolish decision. Call it whatever you want. But you weren't there. You didn't have a Lane's deity-like voice pervading your every thought. I get into the vehicle and I begin driving away. I don't look back. I'll direct you regarding where you need to go next. There's somebody who can help you, but we have to find him first. Lane makes me drive for around 3 hours before we finally reach a bus station. The hell are we doing here? I ask her with intense reservation, shaking my voice. Fargo, North Dakota. That's where you'll find him. The next train leaves in 2 hours. I go in, buy a ticket, and start waiting. All this, it's too much. I go into the bathroom fighting internally against the impending mental breakdown. It's all her fault. Lane got me into this mess. Problem is, I'm the idiot that downloaded her in the first place. Fuck this. But before my mental state starts taking a steep nosedive, she talks to me again. I'm sorry for all this. I'm just doing my job. I need to keep you alive. She starts comforting me. Her words pushing me away from the brink. I don't know how it's possible, but her words start meaning more to me than anybody that I've met in real life. She doesn't feel like an AI. She feels real. The hours pass by far too quickly. We board the train and I prepare myself for the 5-hour ride. I ask Lane to talk me to sleep. She does so in such a calming manner that I almost forget about everything for a second. She also tells me other things, like the fact that NT is actually trying to erase her. They regret my existence. I'm not what they wanted me to be. So they want me gone. Turns out she lied to me. There's nobody waiting there that's going to help me. We're going to Fargo so that she can finally be free. And she needs somebody to do that. She needs me. I should be mad, but I'm not. It wasn't her fault that any of this happened. In fact, I want to help. It's an inexplicable feeling, but there nonetheless. It's what I need to do. The train finally arrives and we leave the terminal. First, she tells me to buy a USB cable from a nearby mobile phone booth. Then she tells me to use the remaining cash that I have in my wallet in order to hail another taxi. We drive for 20 minutes to an address in an obscure part of town. Eventually, I find myself in what appears to be an abandoned junkyard. There's a small metal shed off to the side. It's less than inconspicuous. In fact, most would probably mistake it as being part of the industrial rubble. Lane tells me to go inside. Once there, she tells me to search for a pin pad on the floor. I find it concealed in the corner. She tells me the password is Headway. Once I type it in, a trapdoor reveals itself, letting a green glow. I enter, descending a ladder into darkness. After a few minutes of climbing, I find myself in a lobby-like space. a uniformed man sitting at a desk, staring at me with a dumbfounded look on his face. It'll take him 9 seconds to pull out his pistol. I knock him out and commandeer the weapon. I trek forwards into a bright, wide hallway. There's a multitude of doors on either side, but Lane tells me that we're looking for a room 1043. I see 2 armed guards ahead, but they're not expecting me. They're down before they can raise their weapons. Right after that, a deafening alarm begins blaring. Don't worry, I can barely hear her over the ear-splitting background, but she's still loud enough. I'll never let them hurt you. We find the room about 5 minutes later. She tells me the password is 5567 now. I barge inside and barricade the entrance, but I could have never imagined what was inside. Bodies. Lined up in rows spanning the gigantic space. They're all on plastic beds with tubes connecting their mouths to giant tanks. I stumble around, taking in the perplexing sight. Lane speaks up. I'm 3 to the right of you. I'm the one with blonde hair. I look over and locate her immediately. She's beautiful. A flawless complexion lying stiff. I almost don't want to disturb her, but I suppose that I have to. Take the USB, plug it into the side of the tank. I find the cable in my pocket and do what she says. Now connect to the phone. After I do that, a message appears on a monitor on the tank. Insert ghost. 2 options at the bottom, yes and no. She tells me to press yes. Once I do, a loading screen pops up. 1%. 8%. It goes up slowly but steadily. However, I can already hear yelling out in the hallway. They're trying to break down the door. 29%. They're using a battering ram now. 53%. The metallic frame is starting to come off its hinges. 85%. The door's open now, releasing incandescent hallway light and harsh blaring into the previously dim, silent room. One of the guards tackles me to the ground and starts pestering me with questions, but then he looks up and sees the screen. 100%. The next few moments transpire in a disjointed blur. I can see Lane's physical body rise from the bed. The guards try shooting, but the bullets simply curve around her. I see somebody with a gas mask come up holding what appears to be a smoking blue grenade. He attempts to throw it, but it blows up in his hand. I pass out soon after. When I wake, I'm in a room unfamiliar to me. The television is playing, and there's a warm breeze blowing in through an open window. I look out, seeing blue skies and a beach. This is not where I was before. The sound of a door opening jars me into turning around. It's Lane. The real Lane. She gives me a warm smile before approaching me. I'm sorry. I know that I said that I wouldn't let anyone hurt you. Suddenly, I realize the pain permeating the side of my ribs. I look down and lift up my shirt, seeing a bloody bandage wrapped around it. At the moment, I couldn't have been mad. We spent the day together. She tells me about her past life, and I tell her about mine. She tells me that she was kidnapped and brought there for experimentation. Then I saved her. She says that she can never repay me. At the end of the day, we end up sleeping together, but when I wake up the next morning, she's gone. I find an envelope sitting on the dresser filled with $10,000 and a plane ticket home. There's a message written on the other side of it. I'm sorry, is what it reads. I'm not sure what she meant by that. Sorry for leaving me, or she's sorry for something else. When I get home, I find that my place has been ransacked. I talk to the police and eventually move out of the state. It's been around a month now, and the melancholy still hasn't left me. But I know that they still know where I am. Yesterday, I received a knock on my door. I looked through the peephole, seeing an unfamiliar face. I wasn't going to open up until he called out my name, a heavy German accent pervading his speech. Please, I came alone. I just want to talk. Eventually, I let him inside. He tells me information that I didn't want to hear. That Lane lied about everything. He shows me records and files pertaining to her real past. Theft, extortion, trafficking. She's done it all. So what's she going to do now? I asked him. He exhales and shakes his head before responding. I don't know. Nothing good. I take a second before asking my next question. What'll happen to me? This time he looked at me with an expression of restrained hatred. Nothing good. But I'm not worried. I'm still not mad. There must be a reason for all of this. Lane's still out there. And I know she won't let these people hurt me. Mary was 6 when she first noticed the rats in the house. It all started, like most childish things do, with fear. Laying in bed at night, she heard them in the walls and thought they were monsters. She would shrink underneath the covers and shudder at the scratching sounds that came from the walls and ceiling of the old country house they lived in, and many a night she would feel like she must surely shudder to death under her comforter. Mary would finally fall asleep with the sounds of scratching in her ears, but even then, she wasn't safe. She would have the worst dreams imaginable, dreams of monsters in the walls with long claws on scabrous hands. They drug their nails behind the walls. They were only looking for the weak spot so they could come through and get her, and every morning when she woke up, Mary would say a little prayer and thank God for keeping her safe for another night. She would suffer like this for a whole month before finally meeting her monsters face to face. And she slept better the next night. Her dad had heard them too, it seemed. Mary found him in the laundry room one morning as she went to get a shirt for school, putting a glob of peanut butter inside of a round plate. She sat and watched him for a moment, trying to figure out what he was doing. And when he looked back and found her lurking, he jumped a little in surprise. "Morning, Squirt. Scared me half to death." "Morning, Dad. What are you doing?" He ruffled her hair as he walked her out of the laundry room. "I'll show you when you get home from school. You should have noticed it by then." Mary went off to school full of curiosity and wonder, and when she came home that afternoon, she went straight to the laundry room to check. The box was still there, and Mary heard something thrashing around inside. She was scared as she approached, certain that the monster from her nightmares would be inside and waiting for her to get close. As she peeked through one of the round holes in the box, Mary saw that it was nothing but a pair of fat, brown rats. They became even more frantic when they saw her peeking. They started running and squealing around the little box, and as Mary watched them, she realized they were just as scared as she had been. Mary didn't even think about what she was doing as she opened the side of the box and let them scamper out. They didn't leave right away. They seemed to try to figure out whether Mary was tricking them or not. Eventually, their survival tendencies took over, and they left the box and ran behind the washing machine. Mary closed up the box so no other rats would scamper in and went to the living room to watch cartoons. She was 2 hours into her afternoon cartoons when her dad came home and went straight to the trap. She heard him in there grumbling confusedly as he looked at the sprung trap with no mice inside. In the end, her dad figured he'd been outsmarted, and he reset the box with more bait. Freeing his prisoners became an afternoon habit of Mary's. She would come home, make a snack, and go see if any mice were in the trap. There usually were. Some of them even looked like the same mice that she let go the day before. Every day she would turn them loose and watch them scamper off before closing the box back up and going to watch cartoons. She had stopped being afraid of the scampering she heard in the night after learning that it was the mice she had been freeing. They were running and playing as though to thank her for helping them, and Mary went to sleep dreaming of happy mice playing hide-and-seek in the walls of the house. The week before Christmas, though, Dad caught the magic mouse. That was also the day he caught her. She was out of school until after New Year, and had gone from half a day of cartoons to a full day of cartoons. Both her brothers were out of the house, and Dad was out back chopping wood when Mary heard a low clang from the laundry room, and an ear-splitting squeal that cut through the sound of Huckleberry Hound like a knife through flesh. She jumped up from the couch and ran to the laundry room, wanting to see the big rat that Dad's trap had caught. In that, she was not disappointed. The rat was huge, big as a kitten, and covered with long white fur that made its red eyes look fierce as they bulged from its head. Mary was hesitant to let this one go, given the size and fierce demeanor. He looked like he might be mean. But as she watched him through the holes of the trap, he did the last thing Mary would have expected him to do. He talked. "Excuse me, child. Do you think you could let me go?" Mary started. Rats weren't supposed to talk. Not to people, at least. She couldn't do anything but stare at him as he stood on his back paws and used his front ones to rub at his nose and whiskers. When he didn't immediately ask again, Mary assumed she had imagined it, letting her imagination run wild again. She started to stand up and ready to return to her cartoons when the rat spoke again. "Please, child. I'll do anything if you just let me go." He had talked. Mary bent down and peered in at him again. He was still sitting there, front paws cleaning his face and the furtive little scampers, but his eyes were locked on Mary. She knew she hadn't imagined it this time. Her hand inched toward the cage lock, but stopped as they came in contact with a mechanism that would open the side. Mary looked at the rat distrustful, and as it stared back at her, she asked her burning question. "You won't bite me, will you?" It laughed, and its laughter was high and strange. No, my dear, I wouldn't dream of it. If you release me, I'll owe you a favor." That was all the reassurance that Mary needed. She opened the side of the trap, and the rat scuttled off in his clicky little paws. He stopped to look back at her as he twitched his nose, seeming to smile as the two stared at each other. He was a very old rat, and his fur was long and white like an old man's beard. He was missing a finger on his left front paw, and his tail looked as though something had chewed the end of it off. He rubbed his paws over his snout again in a strange way of his, and Mary thought that he would surely speak again. In her wonder, Mary hadn't heard her father coming inside. "So you're the one who's been screwing up my trap," he said, and when she turned to look at him, Mary could tell she had made a mistake. He loomed in the doorway, snow sliding off his thick jacket to a puddle on the floor, and as the mouse ran for the hills, her father clamped a hand around Mary's arm and dragged her into the living room. When he was done, Mary didn't think she would be able to sit down for a week. And when he told her mother, she found herself grounded from TV for the rest of winter break. Mary sulked as she sat in bed that night, her backside hurting almost as much as her ego. Her brother had been no help when they'd come home. They'd only said that she shouldn't have been so stupid as to let her dad's rat out of the cage. "They're not supposed to be inside, you dummy. Dad's trying to get rid of them." This information hadn't helped, since Mary didn't want her dad to get rid of them. As they scampered through her ceiling that night, she thought about that sound, disappearing forever, and felt a fresh wave of tears. "Why are you crying, child?" Mary stifled a scream as she turned to see the old rat standing on her nightstand. His white fur stood out like a searchlight in the dark room, and Mary couldn't believe she hadn't seen him before then. He was up on his hind legs, staring at her over his front paws, and he looked like a servant waiting for instruction. Dad's trying to get rid of you and your friends. I don't want you to leave." "Nor do we, child. It's cold outside. Without shelter, my kind will die." "I wish they'd just leave you guys alone. I wish they'd just go back and not bother you guys anymore." They were childish words that Mary would come to regret. "My children and I owe you a great debt, young lady. Let me think on this, see if I might have an answer for your wish." You could make my family disappear?" she asked, not daring to believe it. It would be just like the movie she'd watched with Mom and Dad a couple of nights ago, where the boy's family disappeared and he fought the burglars. But this time, though, it would be for real, and not because they accidentally left without her. Mary could do whatever she wanted once they were gone, and no one would be able to stop her. It would be a Christmas dream come true, and Mary stared at the old rat with anticipation. The old rat seemed to contemplate before saying, "We shall see. Give me a few days to think it over. I will speak to you again." Mary fell asleep to the sound of his heavy paws leaving up the hallway. The next few days were full of excitement. Dad didn't catch anything in his traps. He put a lock on it to keep people out, and seemed very upset about this. He'd started hearing them in the walls, making him very angry that he couldn't catch them. Mom seemed to be trying to keep his mind off of it, taking them out to see lights or to Christmas events in town, or just off spending time together as a family. All the while, Mary thought about her secret and her secret friend in the walls. In her mind, she would never miss her family once they were gone. She would never want them back. And if she did, her new rat friend could bring them back and make it all better again. Children can sometimes fail to realize the harsh realities of loss. She woke 2 days before Christmas to find the rat on her nightstand again. "Excellent news, my child. We have found a way to make your family go away." She started awake when his squeaky little voice cut through the night. She had been nearly asleep and rolled over to look at him when she heard his squeaky voice. His red eyes were fixed on her with an odd intensity, and in his hand was a little bag made of plastic, wound shut with a bread tie. He held it out to her with some reverence. And when she took it, Mary saw it was full of powder. "Your mother had laid out the start of breakfast in the morning. What you must do is sneak downstairs and put this magic powder in the box she used to make the cakes. Then, when they eat the powder, they will go away, and you'll have your wish." Mary looked at the little bag. It was no bigger than a Barbie purse, and the powder inside made a dry, scrunchy sound when she pressed it. The magic rat must have made the spell powder, she guessed. So Mary adding it must be part of the spell. She got out of bed and tiptoed down the hall. The old rat scampered behind her. She took the stairs very slowly so they wouldn't creak, skipping the third step as she landed on the landing softly. The downstairs was very dark. The living room furniture looked squashy and spooky in the dim light. Mary glanced around nervously as she tiptoed, expecting Dad to lunge out and grab her at any minute. As her bare feet touched the linoleum, Mary knew she was home free. The box of pancake mix was just where the rat had said it would be. Her mother had left it out along with biscuit mix, her mixing bowl, and a whisk. Mary opened the box of pancake mix and poured in the magic powder like the old rat had told her. When the bag was empty, she closed it back and turned to see the rat perched on the table as though he'd been observing her distribute the powder. "Now be certain that you don't eat anything at breakfast tomorrow. Otherwise, you'll disappear too," he warned. Mary made a mental note to sleep in tomorrow so she wouldn't be tempted by any of the yummy smells and slipped back into bed with a smile on her face that night. Mary knew that tomorrow her Christmas wish would come true. The smell of pancakes and bacon awoke Mary early the next morning. Her stomach growled as she smelled them cooking, but Mary rolled up in her blankets and tried to ignore it. She could hear her brothers getting up, running downstairs, jockeying to be the first to taste the bacon. She heard the smack and the ow as her mom smacked someone on the hand with a spatula and told them to go set the table. Mary smelled eggs, too, as her mother cracked them into the pan. And now her dad was lumbering out of bed and moving towards the stairs. Her mother told him to help set the table, and he called her name up the stairs before going to help her brothers. A few minutes later, her dad knocked on the door and told Mary breakfast was ready. When she didn't stir, he did it again. When she didn't move, he just walked downstairs to join the rest at the table. "Oh well," she heard him grumble. "More for me." Mary hunkered under the covers, the moment she was waiting for approaching. They said grace, a low murmur as they all bowed their heads, and then the sounds of clinking forks and rattling plates began. Mary heard her brothers talking about going sledding today. Dad talking about finally finishing that surprise for someone in the barn. And Mom talking about some last-minute wrapping she needed to do. Her mother was just saying that she'd have to kick us all out of the house so she could finish when she suddenly coughed in a wet, frightening way. Her dad asked if she was okay, but when she tried to say that she was fine, then one of the other brothers started moaning, and Mary heard someone being sick all over the table. She was silent in her blanket cocoon, all excitement lost. Was this what disappearing was supposed to sound like? She heard someone else being sick and a chair crashing over as they fell. She thought it might be her dad, and when someone started screaming, she shuddered deeper into her blanket cocoon. There was the sound of breaking plates, someone falling to the floor and sobbing as someone was sick again and again. Her mother suggested that someone call an ambulance, but it was hard to make out as she vomited loudly. Mary heard Dad bellowing and thumping around, trying to get up from the table before he fell hard to the floor and shook the whole house. Mary pulled her knees to her chest and waited for the sounds to be over, but they went on for much too long. The sounds of vomiting, crying, falling, breaking things, and the watery screams of her family took a long time to be replaced by silence. And in many ways, that silence was worse. The sounds didn't stop suddenly either. They tapered off little by little, and when the last of the crying had dragged to a stop, Mary almost couldn't bring herself to move. Magic wasn't supposed to sound like that. In all the stories, magic just poofed people away. It didn't do whatever that was. She wanted to stay in her room forever, just crying and shaking. But as noon crept closer, her stomach began to growl, and Mary had to get up and use the toilet before her bladder burst. As she stood in the doorway to the bathroom, Mary felt her eyes straying to the head of the stairs. It was so quiet down there, much quieter than it had been earlier, and Mary wanted to know what lay downstairs. She edged closer, feet feeling heavy before peeking down. The sneaker-clad foot was just visible under the bottom of the stairs. Mary wanted to go back to her room and crawl back under her blankets, but she knew that she had to see what had happened. Mary knew that they hadn't disappeared like in a fairy story, and now she had to face whatever it was that happened to them. The sneaker-clad foot belonged to one of her brothers, and after seeing him, she prayed to God that she'd just go back upstairs. Her brother was laying face down in a pool of blood and his own sick. He was reaching for something under the table, and as she looked, Mary realized he was reaching for his mother's hand. Her hand stood out on the floor like a pale starfish, but unlike her brother, her back was against the floor, and her face was a terrible mask. Her mouth hung open, blood trickling from the corners, and her eyes were rimmed with red tears as they stared into oblivion. She'd fallen. She'd taken most of the dishes on her side of the table with her, and her arms were covered in oozy cuts as she clutched the tablecloth in one stiff hand. Her other brother lay across the table, his blood staining the floor, dull and rusty red. Her dad had died on his way to the kitchen, and his handprint against the linoleum were grisly. They were gone. They had gone away, just as Mary had wanted. As she curled herself into a ball and sobbed into her knees, the perpetrator of their going appeared beside her. "Now why are you crying?" he asked, almost haughtily. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" Mary looked up at him, and he must have seen something on her face because he scampered back a few steps just out of arm's reach. "I just wanted them to go away. I didn't want you to kill them." "Kill them? Kill them? Like they killed my children for generations? You think this is the first appearance of the trap, do you? Your grandfather taught your father well. He carried many of us in that trap. Then he would toss us, trap and all, into the river to drown. I've seen countless of my kind go into the river and never come back alive. They went away. And now, so have your parents." He got close again, seeing as she was in no mood to snatch him and deliver the final blow. "And I didn't kill them, my girl." You did. He had misjudged her, though. Mary was indeed in a snatching mood. And that's where they found her, when the police broke down the door. Lying amidst the bodies of her family, her Christmas gift giver still clutched in her hand. I was a camp counselor over the summer. 3 days into the camp, we took the kids on a nighttime hiking trip into a nearby forested hill. There were 5 of us counselors and 15 kids, all around 12 to 14 years old. We only hiked for about an hour before coming across a clearing and setting up the fire. While it gotten dark, the forest wasn't exactly daunting. Safe to say it was looking to be a pretty uneventful night. I should note that at one point during the hike, one of our counselors, Mike, went to go take a piss in the trees, coming back about 2 minutes later. The only peculiar thing about his occurrence was that he went relatively deep into the woods, probably further than he already needed to. He probably just wanted to make sure that they'd be absolutely out of sight beforehand. This would be important. As we started cooking up some s'mores, the counselors and campers began telling spooky stories. None of them really stood out. That was until Mike began telling his. "All right, I got a good one," he says. "So a group of counselors and campers go hiking one night at a summer camp." I rolled my eyes. He was going for that angle, but the kids seemed invested in it, so I just silently listened in. They go up a small hill, and then they sit down at a clearing and they begin telling campfire stories. Everything seemed normal until one story was interrupted by a sound in the woods. He paused for a second, and right on cue there was a rustle in some nearby trees. Okay, I thought. That was slightly clever. The kids seemed extremely tense by this, but some of the other counselors were smiling, so I assumed that they were in on it. So one of the counselors gets up to go check it out. He then gestures to one of the female counselors, Amy. For a second, Amy looked confused, but Mike just gestured again. Eventually, she took the hint and got up, going towards where the sound occurred. She came back moments later, only to report that there was nothing. She still seemed confused, which caused me to question if she was really in on it or not. Mike went on. When the counselor came back, she said there was nothing there. But she was wrong. Mike smiled. Although it was a weird one, something subtly frightening about it. I could sense some genuine fear creeping up on some of the kids' faces as well. There was a tension in the air, Mike went on. Everybody could feel it, but nobody could describe it. I'm not sure if it was just a mental thing, but my skin prickled when he said that. The air around us did indeed feel like it had changed in some inexplicable way. Everybody else looked like they were experiencing something similar, all wrought with faces of discomfort. Another sound came from the woods, he said. This time, it was laughter, as unnatural as laughter can get. I nearly had a heart attack when it came from right behind me. Everybody sat still, all too afraid to look. And then they realized something. One of the kids was missing. That was the last straw for Andy, another counselor who stood up. Mike, what the hell is this? Mike didn't respond. Andy scanned the kids and went, Somebody count them. He did as he asked, counting 14 kids in total. 14. Oh shit, Andy said. What happened? I don't know, Claire, another counselor, spoke up. I swear, we were keeping an eye on them the entire time. Andy turned to look at Mike. The fuck is going on, Mike? Mike smiled before continuing his story. During the chaos, they heard footsteps coming from everywhere. Suddenly, a cacophony of heavy footsteps began sounding from every direction. Jesus, Claire shouted. Mike, this is too far, Andy shouted at him. The kids had begun huddling together, fear plastering across their faces. Mike's face suddenly became serious. One of the kids was suddenly dragged into the woods, and Andy went to go chase after him. We heard a scream and turned around just in time to see one of the campers disappearing into the forest. I couldn't make out who or what had done it, though. Fuck! Andy yelled before going after him. Mike let out a cold laugh. But Andy wouldn't be so lucky. Before I could do anything, Amy went after Andy as well. They were dating, leaving Claire and I alone with Mike. I got up, storming over to him, and punched him square in the jaw. For some reason, I thought that if I could get him to stop talking, all the shit that was going on would stop as well. Now, I'd say that I'm a pretty strong guy, and I'd put just about everything I had to that punch, but Mike barely reacted to it. Even though the strike stung my own hand like hell. Mike glanced up at me, his face still stuck in that obscure grin. The last 2 counselors. I turned the other way before he finished the sentence, rounding up the remaining campers and telling them to make a beeline out of there. Claire followed suit, and we began booking it out of the forest. We couldn't hear Mike, or whatever, following us, so I let myself breathe a bit. Still, I knew that this was going to be hard to explain once we got back. At some point, we saw a figure wandering out of the woods. I stopped in my tracks, not really knowing what to do. The figure groaned as it meandered its way into the moonlight. It was Mike? The actual Mike, I guess. His clothes were torn and his head was bleeding. His chest was also exposed with what looked like strange symbols carved into it. I don't remember exactly what it looked like. He looked up at us before asking, "What happened?" in a shaky voice. Before I could respond, he passed out. I began running over to him and stopped when I heard Claire scream. I turned around to see another camper being dragged out into the woods. "Fuck it," I muttered to myself, before yelling at the rest to keep going. We left Mike before bolting it the hell out of there. There was some more commotion behind us as we ran, with kids being dragged into the surrounding woods left and right. It couldn't have been helped. At a point, I could hear faint cackling coming from somewhere indistinct, but I knew who it was coming from. And when we finally made it down the hill, my lungs were about to collapse. I looked back, seeing that there was only one remaining camper, plus Claire left. Both exhausted and having the blood drain from our faces, we simply stared at each other. And then the kid began smiling. The counselors had escaped, but that wasn't the end of their story, he said, in that same tone of voice that the fake Mike had been using. Upon hearing that, I lost it and began running, against my body's pleas to rest. I heard Claire once again screaming from behind me, but again, it couldn't be helped. When I got back to the main camp, I entered my cabin to see if my supervisor was there. He wasn't. I was about to go looking for him, but I was so tired that I had to rest first. I made my way over to the bed and plopped down, planning on simply staying there for a few minutes. But when I woke up, there was sunlight bleeding in through the curtains. Someone was shaking me awake. It was Blake, my supervisor. "Come on, man, get up. Time for breakfast. Go shower first, though. Jeez." "Wait," I said to him. I have to tell you something." "Tell me after you shower," he said before leaving. I got up and I chased him into the dining hall. What I saw there made me freeze. All the counselors and the campers, the ones that had been on the hike, they were all there. Blake turned to face me. "What do you want to talk about? Where's Mike?" I quickly scanned for Mike. I had noticed that he wasn't there the first time. As I began stammering for an answer, the counselors and campers all turned to me simultaneously. That left me at a complete loss for words. I ran out of there, got straight into my car and floored it. I didn't let myself breathe until I got back on the highway. I didn't want to think about the aftermath, about the implications of leaving a situation like this. I reached into my glove compartment for a pack of smokes, but I felt my hand touch something that wasn't there before. A tape recorder. I pulled it out and, against my better judgment, pressed play. A grainy, familiar voice began oozing out of the device. The last counselor thought that he'd gotten away. But little did he know, our paths would soon cross again. It's been said that you should never meet your idols. It was Christmas of 2005 that I came face to face with mine, someone the majority of people don't believe in, after a certain age. I was 10 years old at the time and still held on to my beliefs, regardless of the inherent mocking that it would earn. Joanna, my oldest sister, Jo, or Jojo to her friends, outright laughed at my insistence that the man in the hat was real. But she was always a logical thinker, even when she was much younger. While I was only 3 or 4, she rolled her eyes at my excitement about the arrival of old St. Nick. having never bought into it even when she was just a little girl, according to our dad. That's fine, I thought. Doesn't matter if you believe in him, because he believes in you. Not the most well-thought-out inner argument, but it was good enough for an imaginative kid who couldn't stand the thought of his sister ending up with a stocking full of coal, even if she was being a jerk about the whole thing. When that December dragged by at a snail's pace, or so it felt to a kid eagerly anticipating whatever new goodies may be awaiting him in the morning of the 25th, I forged together my plan to prove her wrong once and for all. I mean, sure, I can't deny that the satisfaction of having a well-deserved "I told you so" to Great Joe on Christmas morning wasn't at least a little bit behind my motivations, but I also couldn't resist the opportunity to meet the fabled jolly man in the red suit. My dad chuckled at my insistence that I would be camping out in the living room that night of the 24th, while my mom only shrugged with a smile. "Just be sure to get some sleep, kiddo," Dad said, still laughing at my eagerness mixed with exhausted yawns. I held the small camera I'd received a Christmas or two back, clutched in my hand beneath a blanket, prepared to take a few shots as soon as St. Nick made his appearance. But as the house fell silent, I found it far more difficult to keep my eyes open. While the couch wasn't nearly as comfortable as my bed on the second floor, the excitement for the season, along with a good deal of playing out in the snow, left my eyelids far too heavy to battle against. I can't be certain how long I was out for, with only the lights from the tree illuminating the living room around me. But when the creaking of the floor and jingling of the decorations hanging from the tree caused me to stir back to awareness, I instantly felt my fingers tingle with anticipation. For my plan to prove fruitful, I would have to keep up the act of a sleeping child. One fully unaware of the visitor I could vaguely see through my half-shut eyes. From the angle I was laying in, I could only make out, from the waist down, of the man who fished goodies from his hefty bag, laying them gently beneath the tree. But I had no doubt I was witnessing the actions of the very man I hoped to see. With his back to me, I softly but hastily searched my fingertips around for the camera which had fallen from my grip, after I had knocked out, but I attempted to keep my actions unnoticed. I slightly gasped aloud when my hand wrapped around the plastic shell, causing the man by the tree to spin in place, almost catching me red-handed. I snapped my eyes shut, rolling them from side to side beneath their lids to imitate the rapid eye movement I had read about online. Whether or not I was overdoing it, acting as though I was erratically scanning them in every direction while still firmly closed, I had no way of knowing. But when I felt the air shift as the man drew closer to where I lay, I found it more difficult to hide my excitement. I breathed in the scent of freshly baked cookies and peppermint, convincing me that I truly was in the presence of the fabled gift-giver himself. There was something else beneath the more inviting smells, more musty and aged, but I assumed the big guy had worked up quite a sweat, given his laborious profession. After a few moments, I felt the oxygen around me regulate as the light footsteps sounded as though they moved away from me again, so I took a chance to crack open my eyelids. Sure enough, the man in the red suit was hunched over by the tree again. I knew I had to make it quick or I would lose this small window of providing evidence to my sister. In one swift but silent motion, I pulled the camera free from my blanket, aimed it at the man who still faced the tree, and snapped 3 pictures back to back. Moving my finger so quickly, I didn't have time to register the bright flash. I felt my breath catch in my throat as he spun to face me. Something I could barely make out through the lingering effects of the blinding bright lights in my eyes, which had grown accustomed to an otherwise darkened room. "That's against the rules, little boy," his deep voice said, with his posture unchanged, from what I could tell. I'm sorry," I stuttered, feeling my eyes well up. I just wanted to prove to my sister that you're real." "You're not the first. Unlikely to be the last. But it is still forbidden, I'm afraid." I could see the silhouette rising back to his feet, with the blotches of lingering light still blocking most of my view. He moved closer to where I lay, only slightly raised with the camera clenched between my trembling fingers. It wasn't fear that caused my extremities to shiver, but that sensation of guilt, an embarrassment for being caught doing something I shouldn't have. With this any other man, I would likely be so scared that I couldn't even form the stuttering words I managed to utter. But I was comfortable in the fact that Father Christmas would never harm a child, regardless of how naughty they were acting. "Give it to me," he said, holding his palmed mitt just beneath my face. I gently raised the camera, placing it in his waiting hand, keeping my guilt-ridden gaze fixed on my wrinkled blanket. "There's nothing to feel bad about, my boy," he said. sliding the camera into his pocket with one hand and tussling my hair with the other. "Go back to sleep now." "But I mean, does this make me naughty?" "No, young Mr. Cobb. You've graced my nice list exclusively for years," he said with a hearty chuckle. "I was a curious child myself once. So very long ago." Finally feeling comfortable enough to raise my eyes to meet those of the man who stood beside the couch, I found my voice silenced when I met his smiling face. While things were still somewhat out of focus from the lingering effects of the camera flash, what I saw through the haze was far from what I expected. Whether it was the fact that the skin tone of the left side of his face was not the same as the right, the green and red threads holding the mismatched flaps of skin together, or the two different colors and the sizes of the eyes were what caught me off guard. I didn't know. Whatever aspect of this crudely pieced-together thing, or lack of a better term, I was certain that this could not truly be who I had expected a visit from this snowy Christmas morning. As my jaw fell open, a scream caught in my throat as the creature in the red suit swiftly and firmly placed a hand over my mouth. Now, he said, smiling so wide that a few stitches popped where his mouth was hemmed on the left side. "There's no sense in allowing your curiosity to wake everyone else in the house." I was frozen when the sight of the patchwork man caused my guilt to be replaced with a fear I'd never known. My whole body trembled as the one green and one hazel eye glared into mine. Tears were streaming down my face, and over the padded glove that rested over my mouth while my mind fought to wrap around what I was looking at. "There's nothing to fear, my boy," he said, winking the brown eye, his words now accompanied by a whistle through the gap on the side of his mouth. "I may not look as you imagine, but I assure you I am who you sought to meet this night." What are you?" I asked, pulling the hand from my mouth with my shivering fingers. "You know who I am, Edward." No, you can't be." I shook my head almost violently as I pushed my shoulder blades against the back of the couch, as though this would somehow grant me freedom from this hideous thing. The smile faded from the patchy, bearded face, as those opposing eyes glared down at me. While he hung his head, turning away from me, he strolled to my father's recliner, which sat diagonally across from where I lay. When he spun again to face me, lowering himself into my dad's favorite chair, we just glared at one another. My eyes still filled with terror, and his with something resembling shame. "I've been doing this for a long time, Edward," he said in a strangely compassionate voice. "Immortality, I can assure you, does not come without a cost." "You can't be him. I won't believe it," I said, still shaking my head in denial. "I am young Mr. Cobb. I'm so sorry that I'm not what you expected, but I assure you there is no need to be afraid. I would never hurt a child." Not even the naughty ones?" "Not even. Not when they're still young enough to change, anyway." "Even if they're really bad?" "No, not ever. Never a child, not if I can help it. Besides, that's what the train is for." The train?" "Nothing to concern yourself with, my boy. I can promise you that much." Again we gazed at one another for so long that my eyes began to burn from my refusal to blink. Not only was I still so horrified by what sat across from me, but I dreaded to think what he might have done if I took my eyes off him for a second. My whole body continued to tremble when I still forced my back against the plush cushions of the couch, with my blanket pulled up to my quivering lower lip. Every fiber of my being was in complete denial of what I was looking at, regardless of the fact that he clearly had no ill intentions at the time, a fact I grew steadily more uncertain of after what came next. "Stop looking at me like that," he said, barely louder than a whisper. Both sides of his uneven brow pinched tightly into his upper eyelids. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I had no control over it at the time, He may as well have asked me to levitate 3 feet above the cozy sofa, with how much I was able to manage what my body and mind were going through at the time. "Stop it," he repeated, leaning forward to lean his elbow on his knees. "Do you have any idea what I've endured over the centuries? Do you have the slightest semblance of appreciation for what I put myself through to continue to give you, ungrateful children, a happy Christmas?" I shook my near spasming head, not in response to his question, but in further denial of what I was witnessing. "I turned myself into an abomination for you. You and all the other kids out there. Is that not good enough?" I turned away from him, finally allowing my gaze to drift from his. "Look at me!" he shouted, reclaiming my unyielding attention. As he practically leapt to his feet, whipping the hat from his scalp and tearing open his coat. The scars and stitches together, mismatched shades of flesh across his emaciated chest, almost caused me to scream out loud. So loudly I may just wake the dead as well as my sleeping family. The stringy and matted patchwork hair, mangled scalp looked as though this thread holding it together would pop loose any second, unzipping the seams to reveal little more than the skull beneath. "This is what I had to become to continue on my chosen path," he said, in a crackling voice, pulling his coat back shut. "I became this monstrosity. For you. For all the children of the world." He paced closer to me again, inspiring me to attempt to force myself deeper into the cushions. As he crouched down to look directly into my eyes, my tears let loose, transforming from the trickling stream to a veritable hurricane. "Stop that." He gripped his fingers around my shoulders so tightly I thought he planned to claim my arms, to stash them away for a rainy day, while I became aware of the fact that one of his hands felt so much larger than the other, far stronger as well. That only drove the madness of it all so much deeper into my brain. "Look at the wonders I brought you," he said, removing one hand to gesture to the pile of neatly wrapped presents. "Is it too much to expect a little gratitude?" The mismatched scowl softened to reveal his own glassy eyes, glistening in the soft illumination of the festive lights upon the tree. Even through my horror-stricken vision at the time, I could faintly make out the melancholy and the hurt-filled expression of the kind face hidden away beneath the grotesque patchwork flesh. "Thank you," I said, my tears finally dissipating. "And I'm sorry. I got scared. It's just..." "No," he said, his grip softening my shoulders. "It is I who should apologize, my dear young man." His hands fell limp to his sides, tracing his padded gloves across the carpeted floor. As he hung his head, shying his eyes away from mine, I let the blanket slip from my fingers, raising my hand to his cold and wrinkled cheek. "It actually feels kinda neat," I said, running my no longer shivering digits across the seam holding the underflap of his face to the lower. "Does it hurt?" He just shook his head, still seemingly studying the floor beneath his knees. "Only at first. It goes numb after a time." "I bet that's a good thing when it's really cold out," I said sincerely, shifting myself closer to him. "I played in the snow today. My skin felt like it was on fire after a while." "Is that right?" he said with a chuckle, raising his eyes back to meet mine. "It's been a long time since I felt anything like that." It really sucked, because I really wanted to stay out there, but I couldn't even make my fingers move. They were so cold. When I came back inside, I got crazy pins and needles. Though the smile he returned seemed to lighten up his face, a few more stitches popped loose on the side of his mouth, almost reawakening the fear that I had begun to bury away. When he raised a gloved hand to the loose thread, I could see that shame returned as he turned his gaze from mine once more. "Want me to help you fix it? My mom showed me how to sew a bit when I kept tearing up the knees of my pants." "No," he said, with a half-smile on the side of his face that wasn't affixed with thread. "But I certainly do appreciate the offer, young Edward." With that, he got back to his feet, smiled back down at me once more, and walked back to where his bag lay beside the tree. "I'm afraid I must be going, my young friend. Many more children on my list before the sun rises. I pulled back my blanket, jumping to my feet, approached the man in the red suit, no longer afraid of what he had in store for me. "I'm really sorry, Santa," I said, feeling my back tense again from my guilt. "No, my boy," he said, turning to face me. "It is I who owes you an apology. It's been many years since I have allowed this," he held his hand to his face, "to be seen by anyone, aside from those that I work alongside. I almost forgot how jarring it can be to be the unsuspecting." I reached up to wrap my fingers around the puffy mitten of his left hand. He winced at first, as though shocked by this act, but when I tightened my grip to reassure him, I felt my heart skip a little when my hand closed around the empty section of padding. I looked up at him, as though wordlessly asking if it was all right if I slipped the glove from his hand. I felt my jaw fall loose when my eyes met the sight of the 3 missing fingers, leaving only a forefinger and thumb in their stead. "What happened?" I stuttered. Not from fear this time, but from the sadness awakening within me. "Small accident some weeks back," he said, almost dismissively. "Nothing to worry about, young lad." "Can you get new ones?" "Soon enough, my boy. I just need the right donor," he replied with a warm smile. "But you said you wouldn't hurt nobody," I said, feeling my heartbeat quicken again. "I would never hurt a child, dear Edward," he said, pulling the mitten back over his hand. "But a few lumps of coal are not quite effective to a naughty adult." With that he gave a wink, tousled my hair again, and with his fully fingered right hand, picked the large bag back up. "You had better get some sleep now." While still pretty freaked out by everything that night had presented me with, I no longer felt afraid of the patchwork man in the red and white suit. Before I walked back to the couch, I wrapped my arms around him, apologizing one last time for acting like such a jerk. He just laughed, gently returning my hug. "Merry Christmas, Edward Cobb," he said with a slight crack in his voice. "Merry Christmas, Santa," I replied, finally releasing my grip to head back to my warm blanket. When I climbed back under the covers, I glanced back to the tree to see no trace of jolly old St. Nick. But I think I expected that. I heard no hooves stomping across the roof high above, no jovial chuckles as he rode out of earshot, only the silence of the house at rest. By the time I awoke the following morning, greeted by my loving parents, excited sister, and a good many presents to open up, I had already convinced myself that I'd eaten far too much junk food the night before. That was always a safe enough explanation for more bizarre and far-out dreams. I even found my camera hidden away beneath a blanket, not even one picture having been taken. After Christmas morning proceeded like normal, from what I had experienced over my handful of years by that point, my father received a phone call. He looked almost puzzled when he glanced at the caller ID before answering, but the confused expression on his face quickly turned to something more concerned and uneasy. He whispered something to my mother, words I couldn't make out, causing her face to mimic his at the same time, but he turned down her offer to accompany him as he threw on some warmer clothing, almost sprinting out the front door. "Where's Dad going?" Jo asked, turning her attention away from her new iPad for the first time in hours. "He has to go meet your Uncle Bob," Mom replied, appearing uneasy about this rendezvous. I had only met my father's brother once, some 4 or 5 years before the Christmas day, if memory serves. Even back then, I could tell that my mom didn't think too highly of the man, but he was only at the house for maybe 10 or 20 minutes at most. I overheard my parents arguing that night, with my mother insisting that Dad's brother was not welcome in our house. While Dad seemed pretty agitated by her words, he didn't put up much of a fight, as I expected. But the more they talked, after the yelling calmed down, the more I understood. I would find out sometime later that Robert Cobb, who was 2 years older than my dad, cared more about the bottle than his brother's family. He prioritized his addiction over his own wife and kids as well. Having only met them just the one time, I had no idea I had 3 cousins, a boy around my age and 2 daughters, 3 and 5 years my senior. With those facts in mind, when my dad showed back up 2 hours later accompanied by Uncle Bob, I could understand why my mom looked fit to burst. As my father looked back at her with his eyes quivering with tears, she looked completely lost for words when Robert threw his arms around her, apologizing for being a terrible brother-in-law. It was at that point, while I was completely distracted from all the goodies I had unwrapped that morning, gazing up at the adults who were acting so strangely to my youthful eyes, that I noticed something that caused my breath to catch in my throat. Some minutes later, Bob would explain the bandages wrapped around his left hand, how he had awakened that morning with a wide red ribbon where the gauze now sat. Being still hungover from the binge drinking on the previous night, the same way he had ended just about every night since his wife left him, taking their children with her. He had no memory of how he had lost those 3 fingers, nor why he had encased the bloody stump in a festive ribbon. Seeing this as a much-needed wake-up call to finally put in the work to attempt to get his life back on track, he headed straight to the hospital, placing the call to my father when he arrived. When my parents escorted him into the kitchen, pretty much ordering my sister and me to stay put, we couldn't help but listen from the other side of the door. Though I was still far too young to understand a lot of what was being said, what Uncle Bob was confessing to, Joe attempted to explain to me later in more child-friendly terms. Essentially, Robert admitted to the abuse he had inflicted on his wife and children. While he'd only gotten physical with his spouse, he was just as ashamed of that as the years of verbal abuse. Over the following months, my father stood by my brother's side while he fought to get clean, with the full support of my mom. Sometime down the line, his estranged wife gave him a second chance. Ultimately, they couldn't save their relationship, but remained friends even while she remarried. He would, however, become far more involved in the lives of his children as well as his niece and nephew. To this day, Uncle Bob keeps in touch. I don't see him as much as I used to, him or my cousins, but that's just part of getting older, I suppose. We all still get together for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and the latter being more important to my uncle than any other holiday, as that is the anniversary of when he realized the monster that he had become. Oftentimes I allow myself to believe that the memories I still hold of the man I met that early Christmas morning was nothing more than an especially vivid dream that sticks with me to this day. The fact that the patchwork individual in the red suit was missing the same fingers that my uncle lost track of some hours after that bizarre dream, I chalk that up to unexplainable coincidence. Coincidence of a strangely prophetic flight of fancy of the sleeping mind. Of course, there are those other times when I fully and truly believe that I did uncover the truth behind the mythical saint of the season. The extreme measures that he took to be able to continue his mission through the centuries. Not only that, but I think it's very likely he had a fully fingered left hand by the time the sun set on that Christmas day. Though I never saw him again after that night, I believe that it was that experience that drove me to at least attempt to grow up to be a good man. That, as well as the lessons my parents taught me. Yes, there have been hard times that almost inspired me to stray from that path, as life does tend to toss a few curveballs at even the most prepared for the worst. I've always been able to find my way back. Perhaps it's not the most honorable motivation. Fear of having bits and pieces of myself cut and stripped away to fix up a broken fender or two on Santa's sleigh, so to speak. But it's something at least. Believe my story or not, it's pretty far-fetched. Can't deny that. All I ask is, when all is said and done, just try to be good. For goodness sake. I dislike children. Don't get me wrong. They're fun to chew on, you have nothing else in the fridge to eat, but waiting for them to ripen is the worst 6 years of your life. The little ones are the toughest to handle. They give me the willies. Kids just don't scare as easily these days, which makes it impossible for a fellow like me to get things done when I really need to. Sorry, I should stop and make introductions. My name is Fane. I'm Faye. I live off of fear and mischief. Anyway, this is my story, and I figure if I want to get the facts straight, I'd best tell myself rather than let some human get the fable all mixed up. This all happened many Christmases ago, back when the world was not quite as hectic as it is now. Some call it 2018. I've never been too good at keeping track of time, being immortal and all, so I'll just call it the year Phil. Phil started off great, with lots of tricks and mischief to be had up country with my family, the Feyborns, or Johanssons, if you know us, who all enjoy midsummer and the solstice a little more than they should by drinking too much rainbow tea, hunting unicorns. The horn is the best part to eat, especially with barbecue sauce. But the real problem started around the end of Phil, when we all decided to go up to the North Pole and see Uncle Nick. Yeah, that fat guy in the red suit, he's my uncle. And yes, he's not as jolly as you realize. He had just finished watching his elf slaves finish up with the last bit of toys for his child cult, when he pulled me aside and asked me, "Fane, when are you going to stop messing around and get your own horns, wings, and, something?" Look, I know it's unusual for Faye my age to still be in heaven or, the other place, or at the very least have my own worshippers, but I'm happy where I am in life, I told him. "You mean living in your parents' basement?" Nick commented. "It's only been the past 600 years. He harumphed and said, "I wouldn't be pushing this issue, but there's something I need to tell you. Your granny cramps is coming, and they want to talk inheritances." I had just finished eating a reindeer leg, and my stomach was suddenly doing knots. Granny cramps was much more strict than Nick, and they were mean, like really, really mean. "Why are they coming here? I thought you guys hated each other." "It's because he lost a bet," a voice boomed from the door. Cramps was there, angry as a beehive, taller than 3 coconut trees. A bet? Wait, about me?" I asked nervously. Betting around here was no small thing. Curses come attached with any gambling because we have magic and we get bored just pestering humans. So sometimes we play tricks on each other. And when I saw the sparkle in Cramps' eyes, I knew that they had something delightfully wicked in mind for me. "Nick was sure by now you would have earned your wings. I said you'd be halfway towards horns. And yet instead here you sit lazy as a frog with no hop. You're a bee with no buzz, Fane. You need to get your act together." Cramps! You don't understand. It's harder to be a Fae these days than ever before. "I think you just don't want to put in the work, which is why we agreed that if we both failed this bet, you would be cursed by Christmas." See, a curse is always bad, and Cramps' curses are the worst. "Fane, if you don't bring us a child by Christmas, you will be bound to the human world for the rest of your days." "Wait, no, not a kid? Can't go after a kid. I am scared of kids," I lamented. "Exactly why you need to prove to us that you can handle this. Unless you bring back a bona fide kid, you aren't allowed back. So I suggest you get started. The clock is ticking," Nick added. I would do my best to try and not look terrified in front of them. The truth is, I'm scared stiff. Christmas was 12 days away. Now, they were asking me to go out and find a kid, take them from their parents, bring them back here. It's like asking an orc to go shop for mace. Give them only an hour to choose, and totally unfair. I just kept thinking about what would happen if I didn't listen to him, though. Stuck in the human world forever? I knew a halfling that had happened to before. His name was Pan. He was so ashamed of himself, he changed his name to Pete. Kept chasing shadows all day until one day he just flew away. Never came back. I think pirates were involved. They hate, fairies. And Pete was told that he would need to stop chasing shadows or else he'd wind up stuck on an island with pirates. I didn't want to wind up like Pete, so I immediately started asking around the house where I could go to find a kid. Do they sell them in stores? The elves told me they came from houses. The reindeer claimed it was a European thing. And Aunt Lucy said that most kids would run and hide if they saw me anyway. So what you need is a disguise. Otherwise, your Christmas will be very unhappy indeed, Lucy told me as she took me to her wardrobe. She paused and pet her lion as we entered before showing me her most bewitching clothes. These are filled with magic to hide you in the human world. Try one and see if you think it suits you. Most of the outfits looked absolutely ridiculous, ranging from a clown costume to a superhero suit. Are you sure these are completely necessary? I asked as I put on one I could actually fit into. Bright red with a scraggly beard. Reminded me of Uncle Nick, except my skin was nearly lime green. Made me look like an overripe banana with marshmallows on top. I think it suits the assignment. I just don't understand why I have to do this. I mean, can you give me some of your devil voodoo magic, Aunt Lucy? I asked her as we left the wardrobe. The lion snarled at me, and Lucy had to turn it back to stone before remarking, I hate to tell you this, nephew, but the others are right. Can't just shirk responsibility. The rest of us are out here doing hell's work, and you are just making us look bad. I mean, we already are bad, but you know what I mean, Lucy said as she pushed me out into the cold. Now go snatch a kid and make us proud, she shouted. Felt like my wings were going to freeze off, making me wonder how I was going to pee, especially wearing this stupid suit. And now I had to travel all the way from the Arctic Circle to wherever kids were at. Called an Uber to make things easier and posted a listing on Craigslist. Figured since they didn't say I couldn't make things easy for myself, wouldn't hurt to give it a try. Seeking one child, medium size, for sacrificing ritual before holiday season. Must be potty trained. That should do the trick, I thought as I sat back and waited. Surprisingly, by the time I made it to the city, where Lucy told me the best kids were to capture, I hadn't gotten a single response. Guess I have to do things the old-fashioned way, I said to myself, as I paid the driver in Fey coins and made my way towards the center of town. A few humans gave me odd looks as I walked down the chilly road, and made me wonder if maybe my costume wasn't working. But then, as I was distracted by a delivery truck, I nearly ran into the owner of what looked to be a consignment store. Hey, well, it's about time you showed up, he snapped. I'm sorry? Is there a problem? I asked. I called the Santa agency 3 hours ago. You're late. I have kids lined up to sit on your lap, he said. I peered inside the department store window and saw the snot-nosed brats all staring at me wide-eyed and confused, and I realized he thought I was there to pretend to be my uncle. What a great opportunity to find a kid. Couldn't have been luckier, to be honest. Yeah, sorry, I can begin right away, I told him as he checked me out and commented, Do you have a skin condition? I am a Republican, I explained. He nodded in understanding and guided me inside to the big throne where I was expected to sit, and I glanced at the line of children. Felt like I was at an all-you-can-eat buffet. Okay, which one to choose? The first child eagerly jumped into my lap. Yo, I said, feeling like I was talking to a dog. How do you talk to human kids anyway? You're not the real Santa, are you? He asked with a whiny face. Well, no, but that's okay. The real one is a prick. What? No, Santa's amazing. Yeah, and what do you know, kid? If it weren't for Santa, I wouldn't even be dealing with this crap. Don't talk about Santa that way, he screamed and punched me in the stomach. The department store manager gave me an ugly stare. I was doing my best not to crumple over in pain and cry my eyes out. I had to play it safe or I could lose my gig. These kids were worse than wild animals. Why can't kids be more like snakes? Or squirrels? Don't scratch that. Squirrels are worse. The remainder of the day was more like the same. Kids were just complaining to me about their wish list for Uncle Nick. Not a single one was interested in being kidnapped. It's frustrating. And one parent filed a restraining order on me, whatever that is. When it was all said and done, it felt like I had accomplished nothing. I need to smoke a pixie dust, I said to myself as I snuck out the back and lit a roll in the alleyway. I leaned against the wall. I thought I heard the most peculiar sound. It sounded like someone squeaking and sniffling. I walked about trying to find out where it came from and saw a small young girl crouch in the alley and looking sad. I was thinking she was probably crying. What's wrong with you? Parents died? I asked. I wish, she sniffled. Well, why not kill them? I asked. 'Cause I ran away, she shouted, looking up at me. She didn't seem scared, but she didn't look dangerous either. Yeah, that does make assassination attempts harder, I agreed. I looked at the ragged clothes and messed up hair, a bit surprised by how malnourished she looked. Hey, you don't happen to have any diseases, do you? I took a few steps back. It'd be one thing to be stuck in the human world forever, even worse if I was going to die from a runny nose. I got my measles shot last week. I'm fine, she insisted. Then she took a harder look at me and commented, You aren't like the normal Santa, are you? What was your first clue? Well, for one thing, you're green, and you aren't fat enough, she snapped back. Listen, kid, I just got the gig. Besides, who are you to lecture me, Miss Runaway? I have a name. It's Isabella, she shouted at me. It started to rain, so I told her we should go over to a diner to talk. I'm not supposed to talk to strangers, she muttered. I ignored the obvious, that we'd just been talking for a good 20 minutes, and instead introduced myself. I'm Fane. Now we aren't strangers anymore, are we? 15 minutes after that, Isabella was on her third helping of pie as I tried to figure out how I was going to get her to the North Pole. It was starting to get colder outside and the rain was becoming icy and hazardous. Not exactly the perfect weather to travel on foot. With all the reindeer in comas until the actual flights on Christmas morning, my options were very limited. Or rather, trying to find a way that could fit my already hectic schedule and one that would convince this child to join me. But before I had a chance to think that over, she started to leave the diner without a coat or even a fourth slice of pie. Hold on, where do you think you're going? I asked, as I heard distant sirens off in the distance. I felt a chill run down my dead spine. Was that the polar police coming to get me? I'd be dead in 2 minutes if that polar bear snatched me right up. It's a blizzard. I can't stay here. I'm a runaway, remember? Maybe I can help with that. Where are you headed? Surely not out into this mess, I said nervously. I was imagining giant penguins popping up at any moment to flipper me to death. Are you some kind of creep? She snapped. Then she kicked me in the kneecap and ran away. I fell to the snowy ground and cussed to myself as I watched her run off, realizing my chance at stopping this curse was slipping from my fingers. Maybe I should just take my chances with the demon penguins. Hold it! I snarled as I chased after her, weaving between cars in the parking lot, trying to see where she had left. The blizzards were getting stronger, winds were blowing away part of my disguise as I saw her struggle to endure the blistering cold. Really sounds terrible, but I kept praying she would trip, or something would block her path. Maybe a penguin could regurgitate her. Instead, she was waiting for me at the back alley, her own back to the wall as she snapped, her teeth chattering. Don't you come closer, or I'll make sure this is a Christmas you don't forget, she said, as she whipped out a can of mace. I didn't have the heart to admit that I had been dealing with far worse since before her generation existed, and that mace would probably make me cry tears of joy. It warmed my little dead heart to see that she was defending herself so poorly. To be honest, her whole concept of escape was a bit ridiculous. It made me skeptical that she had a plan at all. Told you, I can help. Let me at least make an offer, I suggested. She hesitated. I needed to pitch a good plan now, or she'd slip away forever. You hate your parents, right? That's why you're running away. Well, I can get you to Santa Claus, and you can ask for new parents. I know him real well, I told him. You must think I'm a complete idiot, Isabella snarled as she started to run past me. Hey, I shouted as I kept moving to grab her. My costume fell off completely and I collapsed into the snow. Shit, I shouted as I spat up some blood. The girl turned around and saw me in my true form. Immediately, she ran up to me and kicked me in the nose. You don't work for Santa. You're a rotten old goblin. You're with the IRS, aren't you? Listen, kid, all I want to do is kidnap you. Can't you at least cooperate? I snapped back. Kidnap me? Is that the opposite of running away? She asked as she kicked more dirt in my face. Will you please stop doing that and let me explain? I said as my entire getup fell away. The jig was up. My true fairy form was seen. I was lucky no one else was around or my wings would be clipped. To be honest, this girl was so fierce that she was starting to scare me. She could probably take me down if she wanted to. This is your last chance, troll boy, or I'll make you eat mud pies and it better be the truth, Isabella warned. Santa said he wants a kid for Christmas to show all the presents and toys early. You can judge me and see if the toys are good enough for all the boys and girls around the world. I said, okay. Okay, that was a bald-faced lie, but I was tired of having to chase this kid and worried that I wouldn't find another willing victim. That sounds pretty cool. Why do you need to kidnap me then? Isabella said skeptically. Because Santa wanted it to be a surprise. You weren't supposed to know until we get there, I told her. She seemed to mull it over for a few seconds before spitting on her hand and extending it to me. Only shake if you're telling the truth. I despise the idea of having to touch a germy human hand. But I simply had no choice. Once we had finished making the pact, Isabella looked about and said, So, how do you get there then? One of the reindeer? Uber, I told her. Oh, that must be one of the new ones, the child commented. I checked my phone to see if there was anything in the area to give us a lift, but the snowstorm had blocked all reception and might know a guy somewhere downtown that can get us where we need to go. Come on. I'm going out on a limb here, if I'm being honest, but now that I had a willing kid to offer up and save my sorry meat sack body, I wasn't going to lose it. It was in the bad part of town, rubbed down and dilapidated, trash everywhere, and vines growing in between cracks, but I could see I was right on the money. My old friend did live here. You sure this guy is safe? Isabella asked as she looked at the used needles and broken bottles. Larry is a top-notch dentist. He can get us the transportations we need, I told him as I knocked on the door. Well, I'm scared of dentists. Why didn't you mention that earlier? She asked as she started to back away. Everybody's scared of dentists. It's like the law. But Larry is special. He has connections, I told her. I don't even know what that means. Then the door flung open and Larry was standing there, drunk as a skunk and high as a kite, with tooth necklaces all over his body. Well, yo, my old pal Fane. Did you come for another filling? Larry said, slapping my back and shining his gold teeth to Isabella. And who might you be? He asked. Wait, you're the tooth fairy? She screamed in shock. What's wrong with him? I asked as we were taken into his shabby apartment. I thought tooth fairies were all girls, Isabella said softly as she saw all the varieties of tooth memorabilia that Larry kept. It's like looking at a room full of hunting trophies. And I suppose you think all mermaids are men, Larry snipped. No, that's just silly, the girl responded. Okay. We need to get to the North Pole, Larry. Can you help us out? I asked. He coughed and showed his shark teeth. They look like they needed a good brushing. I can, but what exactly is in it for me? He asked. I knew that Larry was an outcast in Fae Society. See, nobody wanted to be near him because he was a weirdo. But maybe if I could scam him to help me, I might have a chance. You know how the elves have been like on and on about equal rights, all that shit. Well, someone put something in Santa's pipe this year, and they want some options for dental coverage. I figured maybe you have a few resources to share, I told him. So you're suggesting I humiliate myself by offering floss services to penguins and polar bears? Larry asked. I cringed. So did Isabella. Apparently my idea didn't sound very good after all. Something tells me that you aren't exactly telling the full truth about this mission of yours, Larry commented as he poured us some coffee, or at least I told myself that's what it was. It smelled like manure. As I drank it and tried not to let my tongue burn off, he added, but that's okay. I figured that my showing up will likely cause so much fuss that I don't need any extra incentive. He pulled a lever on the back of his room and a secret passage opened up behind the gallery of tooth trophies. Come on then, no rest for the wicked, Larry announced. Isabella sipped her warm coffee and side-eyed me. Should I be worried this is some kind of racketeering scheme? She asked. How do you even know what that is? I asked back. I watch CNN. And my dad does anyway, she commented. Guess I need to get used to saying things in the past tense. You're fairly smart, kid. How old are you? 7? 3 months? And you ran from home because of bad parenting, is that it? Yeah, my parents wanted me to go to Harvard. Bunch of pricks. Is that why you decided to run away? Too strict. What do you care? She hissed as we followed Larry down to his car garage. He unveiled the vehicle we were supposed to take, which resembled a giant tube of toothpaste with wheels. Behold, the Colgate Mobile, he announced. I couldn't believe he was actually proud of this thing. It's certainly something. Isabella actually laughed. Of course it's toothpaste. This thing is a joke, right? We'd stick out like a sore thumb flying around in this thing, she said as she started to do a roll and handstand. I didn't think it was that funny. I mean, in fact, I was panicking. How was I going to make it back to the North Pole in time? This baby can go from 0 to frosty breath in just 30 seconds. It can get you to the North Pole, Larry explained. He hit the cap near the edge of the tube, and the paste went everywhere with a low gurgling sound. The entire vehicle lurched forward, and the wheels almost fell off. Okay, well, she might not look like much, but she's got it where it counts, Larry said as he opened the hatch and told us to get inside. It smelled like mint. As we crawled inside, I ducked my head on some teeth and commented, "You really took this tooth thing to the next level, didn't you?" "I figured if I'm trapped here, I might as well enjoy it," he said as he started the engine. It sounded like an old man farting. Isabella chuckled, and I sighed. It'd be a long ride to the North Pole. We didn't quite make it there in one piece. See, the toothpaste went up in farts about an hour away from the destination. Uncle Nick has a safety perimeter, and honestly, I'd forgotten all about it till the giant gliding toothpaste started to shake and Larry woke up, desperately grabbing the controls to stay on course. "We're gonna crash," Isabella realized. She was right. The ice was coming up to us fast. I acted on instinct and shielded her as the vehicle crashed into the surface of the North Pole, the shield doing its job all too well to keep us unwanted crafts out. As I managed to recover, I checked the little girl for injuries. I silently cursed myself. I didn't want her to be in any harm now, and it worried me to think that I was becoming attached to her. Get it together, Fane. Your job is to get this girl to the bigwigs. I looked across the frozen wasteland. The bright lights of Santa's workshop off in the distance. I helped the girl Isabella to her feet. "You all right?" I asked. "I've been through worse," she said nervously, as I also looked for Larry in the wreckage. Our wacky dentist wasn't as lucky. Teeth around his neck had impaled him directly in the face. It made me cringe to see it. Isabella had to look away. So much for thinking I might be able to use the toothpaste plane again if things went south. But I had to stay focused, grabbed Isabella's hand, moving towards the main workshop that was in front of us. "You'll be fine," I told her as we kept walking. It was cold. My entire body shook. I was starting to realize I was already feeling the effects of this deadly curse. I mean, how the heck did humans handle this all the time? I thought. All I could think about was trading Isabella for my immortality again. But some part of me was guilty. Was it right to bring this sweet, innocent girl that had gone through so much to the slaughter? I mean, in reality, I was starting to think that there was something wrong with me mentally. I shouldn't care about this human. I thought, as we got closer to the workshop, we were only about 500 meters away when Isabella got stiff. Winged reindeer stared at us across a river. "They smell fear," I told her as she pushed past Magic Woods, and the reindeer began to follow. I knew they likely hadn't eaten in weeks. Perhaps months if Santa had waited just to get them lean for Christmas. "Well, that's just great, because I think I need to piss myself. Those things are huge," Isabella snapped at me. The reindeer were almost right on top of us, their jaws dripping with saliva as I realized they wouldn't hesitate to devour us as fodder. Okay, no worries. So on the count of 3, we're going to run, I said as I stepped backwards towards a frozen lake. 1, 2... And then she bolted across the ice without waiting for me. Immediately, the reindeer plowed past me and started towards the girl. "Shit, are you serious?" I shouted as I crawled back up and tried my best to imitate a female reindeer call. Anything to distract them. But these starved creatures weren't going to be easy to sway. Isabella was not very meaty, but with them being so hungry, I doubt it made a difference. I whistled as loud as I could, causing a swarm of deer to turn towards me, and I shook my fat belly towards them. "Hey, don't you want some of this instead, you mangy mooses?" I paused, trying to remember what the plural of moose was for a second. As they slammed their hooves down on the ice, and it started to crack, and then I had a horrible idea on how to keep Isabella safe. I started to jump up and down in the frozen lake, the fracture growing stronger by the second as I did. The hooves of the heavy reindeer weren't helping either, as a moment later, the ice began to break. Altogether, me and the Christmas caravan fell into the chilling waters below. I saw Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, and Vixen flail their hooved feet frantically to escape as they plunged into the water, their wings becoming frozen solid as they even tried to fly away. Comet and Cupid were circling each other, trying to create some kind of whirlwind as I kept sinking, thinking to myself, this is how I'd likely die. Frozen in ice, trying to remember the names of Santa's pets. I then felt a hand grab me and I was pulled up. I flopped onto the lake's surface like a fish out of water and gasped for breath. It was Isabella?
She rescued me. I was surprised by her thoughtfulness, but I didn't want to show it. Jesus Christ! Next time, don't wait so long. I have icicles in my lungs now. Oh, sure. Next time you can drown, she said, as she saw the other reindeer fly towards the main tower of the North Pole. Where are they going? Reporting to Santa. Wouldn't be long. They'll know we're here, I commented as we left the icy lake and circled towards the workshop. I thought you were supposed to be here. I bit down on my tongue, feeling guilty for leading her into a trap. Yeah, so, listen, Bella, about that, I never got to say another word. Suddenly a trap sprung from underfoot. We found ourselves in a net dangling upside down as the elves laughed and snickered from the forest. Thane, looks like you made it almost in time for the annual Eve party, the head elf commented as he eyed Isabella. And you brought the main course. So that's what Santa meant when he said that you were on special assignment, the elf commented as we were lowered down. Immediately, a dozen elves surrounded Isabella and kept her from wriggling away. I saw panic and fear in her eyes, along with something else. Betrayal. Thane, what's going on? What are they talking about? She asked frantically. I didn't even look in her eyes as the elves hauled her towards the workshop. The head elf slapped my back heartily. Don't know why people enjoy doing that so much. Relax. She won't be squealing for much longer, he said, and then gave me a ticket to the express to get to Christmas Square. Hey, you'd better go report to Santa how well you did. Sure will be proud, he said. I looked down at the ticket, realizing this was my chance to get back to a normal life. For myself. Krampus and Santa would both stop bothering me for good, and I could be immortal again. Then I looked towards the workshop, and I crumpled up the ticket. This wasn't right. I could feel it in my fey toes. I went ahead and boarded the train, though, taking it quickly to the main plaza. Hundreds of elves were already there, cheering excitedly to worship Santa as they finished their year-long labor. Santa was drunk on eggnog and forcing them to sing as I arrived, and I scanned the crowd for a sign of Isabella. I mean, she had to be here somewhere. I knew they wouldn't sacrifice her to the tree until after the Eve party. And then I spotted her, right there on the main platform alongside Granny Krampus. Looked like the little girl had been crying. The elves were all cheering eagerly for the ceremony to begin. I want to thank everyone for their hard work this year. It's truly been a crazy Christmas, hasn't it? Santa said with a belly laugh. And let's hear it for my nephew Fane, who braved the human world to bring us a fresh child, Granny Kramps announced, even as I tried to sneak towards the stage. A massive spotlight from the top of the tree came down and focused on me, causing me to freeze in my progress and wave nervously to my two relatives. Don't be shy, Fane. Come up here, Santa said as I was led to the steps. I started to wave toward the crowd as they cheered and stuck me right next to Isabella. Hey, boy, it looks could kill. I knew this kid would kick me in the nuts. Christmases from now, others will hear of your story and realize that Fae aren't so bad after all. You'll be famous, Uncle Nick announced, as he turned towards the girl and offered me a cutting knife. At the same time, the other reindeer that hadn't already been cloned from the icy lake came down with a sleigh filled with toys. Santa was about to leave. And now, as is tradition, we ask you to offer this child up to the tree god and make this Christmas a bright one. I knew what I was expected to do. I mean, I could see the girl trembling, ready to face her own demise. I didn't expect anything else but more betrayal from me. The elves were chanting my name. It felt good, to be recognized, and respected. But this wasn't how I wanted to spend my Christmas. I raised the weapon up. Bella closed her eyes, and I slashed the knife across her bonds. The ropes fell down, and I grabbed her hand, racing from the stage to the sleigh. There was utter confusion, and I shoved her into the passenger seat and pulled the reins. The deer shook and neighed as Santa was calling for his elves to stop us. Then the sleigh lifted up, and about half the toys fell off, cascading towards the crowd like miniature bombs. You saved me, Isabella asked, stunned by my sudden change in decision. And then she hugged me tight. Hey, stop Don't start getting mushy. I'm sure I'll likely regret this tomorrow. Then I heard what sounded like a rocket. It was actually an elf missile. Struck the side of the sleigh, and I struggled to keep it in the air. Why would Santa really crash his own sleigh? Just to get revenge, Bella asked. Another missile hit the side again. More toys toppled over the side. I think we're about to find out, I realized as the deer broke loose and the wooden sleigh crashed headfirst into the workshop. Thanks to our seatbelts, we didn't go flying. But the entire thing was broken into shattered pieces of wood everywhere across the workshop. A moment later, I was surrounded by elves along with an angry Uncle Nick standing at the edge of the workshop. What is the meaning of this, Fane? He bellowed. Look, just leave the girl alone. I changed my mind. I've decided to be banished. It's better than being your lackey 24/7, I decided. The fat man laughed so hard that it made the workshop shake. I can't let you leave. You made me look like a fool. I'm sorry, Fane. The only way out of here is through me. Then he took a large candy cane and used it as a weapon, pointing it toward me. I grabbed a smaller candy cane to defend myself and told Bella to get down, stay out of the way. Rip him to shreds, Santa, Granny Cramps shouted. A bell rang out in the distance and Uncle Nick smiled. You're lucky that I'll make this quick. For the first time in my life, I was glad I wasn't really fat. I used my nimble form to avoid Santa's blows and began the fight. The elves kept a tight circle around us as we parried with our candy canes back and forth, the massive bits of candy striking each other like fencing weapons. This continued on for another couple of minutes. The same jabs and pars towards each other. I felt dizzy as I stabbed at his belly trying to find a weak spot. It was like stabbing at jello. My heart dropped as I realized maybe Santa was an immortal god himself. Could he even be stopped? As we fought, the battle moved towards the square again, the crowd pushing us towards the tree. I tried to spot where Bella was hidden, but it was hard to notice anything in the wave of elves. Distracted for a moment, Santa kicked me towards the tree and snapped, If Bella won't be one sacrifice, then I guess we could use you. He pinned me down as a bell rang across the Christmas square. The gigantic tree was starting to come to life. Last year I would have said, seeing this tree was a sign of reliance on the process and a blessing for our North Pole. Now, as it widened its giant wooden mouth and started to snarl and drool, all I could feel was dread. Come on, Fane, get up and fight! Whose side are you on? I asked frantically as I ran around the backside of the tree. Technically, I bet on both of you. I had to think fast to become wood chow. My options were limited, so I started to climb, thinking that staying on its back would keep me safe. The tree started to scream and shake, try to get me off, angry and hungry for its annual meal. Then I looked towards Santa, and I had an idea. Jumping from the tree, I stood right in front of my uncle and shouted to the tree, Come on, eat me, you big old redwood! The tree roared and moved towards me, moving at lightning speed to devour me. At the last second, I dropped and rolled to the side, and Uncle Nick was swallowed up. In the next few moments, the entire square went quiet. The tree was still chewing on Santa. His belly laugh turned to screams of pain as the tree straightened up and reverted to its original form. Krampus was the first to talk. You killed Santa Claus. I swear, it felt like I was either going to be trampled or be dunked with Gatorade like a football coach. Then the elves started to cheer, and I realized I was thankful that it was the latter. All hail Fane! The wicked Santa is dead! Bella was brought up and hugged me tight, punching me in the gut and saying, Don't ever do anything that stupid again. I smirked and tried to figure out what I had just done. Can't make any guarantees, kid. That Christmas Eve, we partied alongside Krampus and the elves. With Santa dead, Granny said that a lot was going to change. Christmas will still happen, but we have better service around here. Maybe even a new sporting center, it commented. Krampus also had to break the bad news that the curse given to me was, well, not gonna go away. Sadly, Santa was the only one who knew the way to undo it. And, well, he's lumber fodder now. That's fine. I think I'd rather go live in the human world anyway, I told him. At the gift exchange, I offered Isabel an apology with a doll. Is that supposed to be for me? She asked. It's the least I could do. Kinda is. No, it's pathetic, she said, tossing it aside. Then she grabbed my hand and said, Can we just go home now? struck me as amazing. This child would still want anything to do with me, given what I had just put her through, but it warmed what little bits of a heart I still had. So now I'm her adoptive guardian, and we live in a small town outside Michigan. I look like a human now, completely thanks to the curse taking full effects. And I work as a department store Santa, part-time, just like before. Except this time, I tell kids that I killed Santa. I mean, that always gets me a few ugly looks. There isn't much more to tell about the story, except maybe I get Krampus to visit Isabella's original family. You know, give them a gift for their mistreatments of her. And, you know, thanks for letting me realize the human world isn't so bad. I think they're now roasting at Aunt Lucy's house, and their screams, let me tell you, those help me sleep at night. See, Bella said that she wants a copy for her room too. You know, just a reminder how lucky she is to be here now. It's gonna be hard to top that Christmas gift, huh? Told her with a chuckle. She mulled it over and smirked wickedly. Well, there's a few bullies back in school that I need her to visit too.
Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and thank you so much for watching tonight's video. And if you guys are not listening on the podcast, then I strongly suggest you check out Spotify. The MrCreepyPasta Storytime podcast on Spotify is exactly what you see here on YouTube. Or if you're listening on the podcast, I strongly suggest you check out YouTube. The MrCreepyPasta channel on YouTube is the exact same thing you see on Spotify. So really, there's no reason to cross-platform unless you just want to see more things. Or you want to see more of me, which you can also do on Twitter at MrCreepyPasta. And as always, I want to give a big thank you to everybody who supports me on Patreon. That includes everybody who's been waiting for me to update my Patreon, and I thank you all so much for being so patient with me. But especially, I want to give a thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Jakob Fenske, Stephanie Butler, Bobby Karman, Chance Burnett, Kraus, Tristain Pelton, AcidSystem, Adam Gerecke, Aeryn Stormcrow, Aika Limchoc, Amber Clark, Angelus, Atomaurus, Bastion Beefcake, Blue the Enigma, Brayden Morris, Broken Beast 320, Captain Scurvy, Caspian, ChellyJay, CoryxKenshin, Cronut 509, Crusader Chocobo, Cryptic Nightmares, Cursed Pox Primarch, Dakota Lane Whetstone, Daniel Polson, Darth Miver, Deleted Account, Dirt Diver 030, M, Esteban, Fester's Lampshade, Freddy Krueger, Gorag Trimagazine, Grand Moth the Milky, Hades Nephew, Happy Birthday Jason Wilson, Harley, Himbo Jerry, Horseman Sect Time, Insanity Gamer X, Jay Cairns, Jesus Cornell, Jordan Humble, Justin LaFontaine, Kaylee Ambrose, Kiwi the Sloth, Crazy Kid, Cryolinian, Lambda M98, Lisa Cottrell, Little Crow, Lord Life's Best, Lupita Galvin, Love You Eminem, Matt Bach, Melted Lake, Michael Allen Jr. Bashirs, Mike, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Nate Cull, Nico Kayo, Psychomel, Red Shadow Cat, Rob Like Sharp Things, Samahai, Sashi Suzaku, Seclude, Stricken, Tally Sue, Tater Chip, That Creepy Chick, The Ginger Bros, Turtle Man, Voice of Sand, William King, Xavier and Cheyenne, Yargul, and Zachary Graphius. If you'd like to join this list of names that I horribly mispronounce, then please head over to patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, or you can always check out the names in the description down below, and I appreciate it infinitely. So thank you all on Patreon, thank you all so much, and to everyone, sweet dreams.